Chapter 2166. Right when Yi Xian was feeling puzzled, an icy cold voice suddenly resounded from behind Yi Xian, "You're his son." "Son?" Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly said, "You're my father's enemy?" Needless to say, he was quite panicked right now. "My father's enemy? What does that mean?" The voice suddenly said, "You really are his son." As soon as it finished speaking, a mysterious force suddenly slashed down towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he swiftly drew his sword and slashed. Bang! An expanse of light erupted, and the mysterious force was instantly obliterated. At the same time, a figure retreated explosively. Yi Xian looked towards the distance, and there was a woman standing there. She wore a tight robe, held a dagger in her hand, and her gaze was extremely sharp like a blade. Yi Xian gazed at her. "Who are you?" The woman stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "I'm your ancestor." As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished on the spot. Yi Xian frowned when he heard this, and then he opened his palm and suddenly slashed with the green profound sword. Bang! The woman was blasted 30 kilometers away by a single strike of Yi Xian's sword. The strength of his current attack wasn't something that just anyone could resist. The woman was first stunned when she was blasted back by a single strike of Yi Xian's sword, and then she exploded with rage. "You bastard!" Yi Xian frowned once more when he heard this. "Have you eaten shit? Why is your mouth so stinky?" The woman spoke fiercely. "You're his son, so what are you if not a bastard?" As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly leaped up and slashed her saber at Yi Xian. The space above him was instantly torn apart, and then a ray of light slashed down. A wisp of a ferocious expression flashed through Yi Xian's eyes, and then he slowly closed them. In the next moment, the space he resided in instantly became illusory. He slashed over. The woman seemed to have sensed something, and her pupils constricted. In the next moment, her body instantly became illusory. At this moment, a hand suddenly pressed on her shoulder. Boom! The woman's body that was about to completely disappear suddenly returned to normal. Meanwhile, the jade-like hand suddenly punched forward. Boom! An explosion suddenly came from the battlefield. Then Yi Xian, who was in the distance, hurriedly raised his sword to block the attack. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Yi Xian retreated hundreds of thousands of feet away along with his sword. After Yi Xian came to a stop, he looked off into the distance. Behind the woman in the distance, another woman had appeared. This woman was none other than the woman from the bamboo house he had seen before. This woman again. Yi Xian frowned. In the distance, the woman beside the woman in the bamboo house suddenly shouted madly, "Martial aunt, kill him! Martial uncle!" Yi Xian glanced at the crazed woman and didn't say anything. The bamboo woman glanced coldly at Yi Xian, then turned to the woman. "Leave!" The woman's face was filled with madness. "Uncle Master, you're so strong. Why didn't you take revenge for your sect? What are you afraid of?" Sect. A trace of bewilderment flashed through Yi Xian's eyes when he heard the woman. Did father annihilate this woman's sect? However, he knew that even though father was careless, his temper was usually very good. The woman in the bamboo house gazed at the woman in front of her with a calm expression. "Go back." The woman erupted completely when she heard this. She was like a wild beast that had gone berserk as she glared angrily at the woman in the bamboo house. "Martial aunt, do you know how master and those other senior and junior brothers died? Do you know how horrifying their deaths were? They didn't even have the chance to be reincarnated." The woman in the bamboo house fell silent. Yi Xian suddenly said, "I want to make it clear that my father's actions are his own, and it has nothing to do with me. If all of you want to take revenge, then I support all of you looking for him. I absolutely won't help you." At this moment, he suddenly understood why the woman in the bamboo house had pursued him so desperately. Obviously, she'd pursued him with an objective. The woman glanced at Yi Xian and remained silent. The black-robed woman glared angrily at Yi Xian. He annihilated my entire sect, so I'll annihilate his entire clan. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Why are you like a mad dog? The black-robed woman stared fixedly at Yi Xian. You bastard. Your entire family is bastard. Yi Xian's gaze instantly became icy cold. I'll tear your mouth apart. The black-robed woman stared at Yi Xian. Bring it on. Yi Xian vanished on the spot. He knew that the woman was intentionally provoking him to attack. Because as soon as he attacked, the woman in the bamboo house would definitely attack as well. But so what? He'd just do it. As expected, the woman's figure suddenly became illusory at the instant that Yi Xian attacked. Yi Xian's eyes suddenly narrowed slightly. In the next moment, he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. However, his sword hadn't even descended when a hand touched the blade of his sword. Bang! The green profound sword trembled violently. At the same time, Yi Xian felt something suffocate his chest, and his figure was blasted flying. At the instant that his figure flew up into the air, a sword had suddenly and mysteriously appeared behind the woman in the bamboo house. The woman didn't even turn around, and she just flicked her finger lightly behind her. Crack! The sword shattered into pieces. Meanwhile, Yi Xian stopped moving. He opened his palm, and the green profound sword returned to his grasp. He gazed at the woman in the bamboo house as he slowly closed his eyes. Slash the future. At the same time, he suddenly attacked. Slash the present with a single strike. Slash the future with a single strike. In the distance, the bamboo lady frowned slightly. In the next moment, she slowly closed her eyes. In the next moment, she suddenly stretched out 2 fingers, and these 2 fingers directly clamped onto Yi Xian's Qingxian sword. But at practically the exact same moment, a sword descended straight down towards the top of her head. The woman spoke abruptly. Stop! Bang! The sword above her head stopped moving, and then it started burning. Meanwhile, the woman suddenly opened her eyes, and the 2 fingers that clamped down on Yi Xian's green profound sword suddenly exerted force. Bang! A powerful force moved along the green profound sword and struck Yi Xian. Bang! Yi Xian instantly retreated explosively for over 30 kilometers. However, he was safe and sound. His physical body was formidable. The woman in the bamboo house glanced at Yi Xian's physical body, and her beautiful brows knit together slightly. At this moment, she was rather shocked in her heart. How long has it been? His physical body has actually become so formidable in such a short time. Yi Xian glanced at the woman in the bamboo house, and then he vanished on the spot once more. The woman in the bamboo house frowned slightly, and then she suddenly charged forward and raised her right knee. Bang! The river of time caved in at the spot where her knee descended. At the same time, a figure was blasted flying from within the river of time. It was Yi Xian. After Yi Xian stopped moving in the distance, a wisp of blood slowly seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Yi Xian raised his head to look at the woman in the bamboo house, and the caved-in space before her hadn't healed yet. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. This woman was actually able to shake the barrier of the river of time. Her strength isn't ordinary. But so what? There was no fear in Yi Xian's eyes. Conversely, there was boundless fighting spirit. Meanwhile, the black-robed woman by the woman's side suddenly vanished on the spot. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he swiftly drew his sword and slashed. Bang! An expanse of sword energy shattered, and the black-robed woman was blasted 3 kilometers away. After the black-robed woman stopped moving, she stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Her gaze was like a sword, and it seemed like she wanted to chop Yi Xian into pieces. Didn't you want to tear my mouth into pieces? Please do. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly, and then his eyes gradually turned blood red. Meanwhile, Xiaofan spoke abruptly, "Young master, she's trying to provoke you. Don't lose your mind." A wisp of a ferocious smile appeared on the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. "Can you endure this woman?" Xiaofan hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "I can't." Yi Xian immediately said, "Then help me block that woman from the bamboo house. 3 breaths of time will be enough." As he spoke, he summoned Xiaofan and tossed him towards the woman in the bamboo house. Xiaofan instantly spoke with astonishment, "Fuck. Young master, I can endure it. I can fucking endure it. Fuck." However, it was too late. He'd been tossed towards the woman in the bamboo house by Yi Xian. As he gazed at the woman in the bamboo house that was very close to him, Xiaofan made up his mind and suddenly slammed forward. The woman in the bamboo house frowned slightly when she saw Xiaofan slam towards her, and then she pressed her fingers together and tapped forward. This tap directly hit the opposite corner of Xiaofan's head. Bang! In an instant, the space she was in started to seethe. In the next moment, her eyes narrowed slightly, and then she retreated over 30 meters. Of course, Xiaofan's reaction was even more exaggerated. He was directly blasted away, and he flew out of her field of vision. After he stopped, Xiaofan, who was lying on the ground, hesitated for a moment, but he didn't get up in the end. He just lay on the ground and said softly, "I'd better play dead." As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't move at all. After she stopped, the woman in the bamboo house looked at her right hand, and her fingers had actually split open. The woman in the bamboo house frowned slightly when she witnessed this scene. This pagoda actually injured her. As if she'd thought of something, the woman's pupils suddenly constricted, and she swiftly turned her head to look over. Not far away, the woman in the black dress had been suppressed by Yi Xian's green profound sword, and Yi Xian's right hand was still holding her throat. The woman in the bamboo house narrowed her eyes when she witnessed this scene. "Don't hurt her." As she spoke, she slowly clenched her right fist. Yi Xian paid no attention to the woman in the bamboo house, and he just gazed at the woman in the black dress who stood before him. The woman in the black dress stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "Come on. Kill me if you have the balls." Yi Xian grinned, and then his right hand clamped down on both sides of the woman's mouth. The woman in the bamboo house suddenly spoke, "Kill her. I'll definitely kill you." Yi Xian swiftly turned his head and spoke fiercely, "I'm fucking begging you to kill me. You're a dog if you don't." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly exerted force. Hiss! In an instant, Yi Xian tore open the woman's mouth, and her entire face was mutilated and bloody. At the same time, Yi Xian swiftly withdrew a sword and stabbed it into the woman's stomach, and then he spun it around. "Does that feel good?" The woman in the black dress gazed at Yi Xian and started laughing. She laughed like a madman. "Martial uncle, you're the only one left from the solitary mystery sect now. You're the only one left. Huh." As she spoke, her soul swiftly started to dissipate. Meanwhile, Yi Xian sensed an extremely terrifying killing intent assaulting him from behind. The killing intent was so strong that it was even more terrifying than when he'd activated the crazy demon bloodline. Note: 1 minute late, 1 extra chapter. I have a stockpile, and I'm willful. Chapter 2167. Killing Intent. When Yi Xian sensed the terrifying killing intent behind him, there wasn't even a trace of fear in his eyes, and there was only madness. Yi Xian had completely activated his insanity devil bloodline. At the same time, he suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword. A ray of blood-red light shot out like a waterfall, and the surrounding space was instantly set ablaze. Meanwhile, a fist suddenly smashed against his ray of light. Bang! In an instant, the ray of light shattered, and Yi Xian retreated explosively with his sword. However, he hadn't even stopped when a shadow suddenly appeared in front of him like a ghost. It was the woman from the bamboo room, and she immediately raised her knee towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. With a command in his heart, the green profound sword transformed into a sword shield that blocked in front of him. Bang! Along with a loud bang, Yi Xian retreated explosively with his shield for over 10 kilometers. At the same time, the area of space where Yi Xian stood just now had been dented into a strange shape. As soon as Yi Xian stopped, he suddenly looked up, and a faint fist had arrived in front of him. Yi Xian issued a command in his heart, and the green profound sword shield blocked in front of him once more. Bang! The green profound sword shield shook violently. Even though it didn't crack, the powerful force passed through the green profound sword shield and struck Yi Xian's body. Bang! Yi Xian retreated explosively once more. Moreover, his entire body actually started to crack. This woman's strength is truly too terrifying. A wisp of a ferocious expression flashed through Yi Xian's eyes after he stopped moving. He raised his head to look at the woman from the bamboo room. She didn't attack again, and she was just looking at him. Yi Xian wiped off the blood that seeped out from the corners of his mouth, and then he laughed hideously. That's it? The woman gazed at Yi Xian, and then she slowly clenched her right hand. In the next moment, she slowly closed her eyes. In the distance, Yi Xian squinted his eyes as he gripped the green profound sword tightly in his right hand. Boundless power of the bloodline continued to flow into the green profound sword. In an instant, the green profound sword turned into a blood-red sword. At this moment, the woman in the bamboo pavilion suddenly took a step forward. As her foot descended, she opened her eyes. This world is boundless. As soon as he finished speaking, he punched out. With this punch, the space-time in front of her suddenly became illusory. In the next moment, a fist imprint had already arrived in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian's pupils suddenly constricted. At this moment, he once again smelled the scent of death. Yi Xian once again drew out the azure profound sword shield to block in front of him. At this moment, the fist mark directly blasted onto the azure profound sword shield. Rumble. In an instant, with Yi Xian as the center, the starry sky within a radius of several million li began to be destroyed bit by bit. At this moment, the entire medium dimension was shocked, and countless experts shot their gazes towards this expanse of the starry sky. After the fist smashed onto the azure profound sword shield, it started to tremble violently. Even though it didn't shatter into pieces, Yi Xian's body behind it had started to crack apart bit by bit. Countless strands of blood surged out from within his body. In an instant, Yi Xian was completely covered in blood. Yi Xian's body trembled violently. At this moment, he felt like a myriad of horses were madly pulling at his body, and it caused his entire body to ache with excruciating pain. Even though he possessed a formidable ability to heal himself, the speed of destruction from that punch had far surpassed the speed at which he could heal himself. Right at this moment, the woman in the bamboo pavilion suddenly withdrew her fist. As soon as she withdrew her fist, the mysterious energy in the surroundings instantly surged back into her fist like tidewater. But in the next moment, she suddenly smashed her fist forward once more. As soon as she smashed her fist forward, everything in the surroundings was instantly obliterated, and even the terrifying barrier of time had warped at this moment. Yi Xian's pupils suddenly constricted. In the next moment, the azure profound sword shield was blasted flying, and then a fist smashed against his chest. Bang! His cracked body had instantly collapsed into pieces, and only his soul remained. Moreover, his soul had even started to burn at this moment. Yi Xian suddenly roared furiously, "Little soul!" As soon as he finished speaking, Little Soul suddenly transformed into a ray of light that entered Yi Xian's soul. Bang! Yi Xian's soul was instantly suppressed. Meanwhile, the woman in the bamboo pavilion was about to attack again. Meanwhile, Xiaofan suddenly roared furiously, "Do you disregard me for injuring my young master? Do I really have no face left?" As soon as he finished speaking, a golden afterimage smashed against the woman in the bamboo pavilion. The woman in the bamboo pavilion who'd intended to attack frowned slightly, and then she turned around to gaze at Xiao Ta who was charging towards her. In the next moment, she suddenly charged forward and struck her knee against Xiao Ta's horns. It was a head-on collision. Bang! Xiao Ta was instantly blasted, flying at a speed that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. When he finally stopped, his body was covered in countless cracks. Of course, his horns were still completely fine. Xiao Ta lay on the ground, and his voice was extremely weak. "Young master, I've tried my best." In the distance, the woman in the bamboo pavilion glanced at her knees. There were 2 deep holes on her knees, and they were caused by Xiao Ta's horns. The woman in the bamboo pavilion glanced coldly at Xiao Ta who was lying motionless on the ground. In the next moment, she vanished on the spot, and when she appeared again, she was already in front of Xiao Ta. She grabbed Xiao Ta who was on the verge of death, and then her right hand suddenly grabbed both of Xiao Ta's horns. Horn pulling. When he noticed the woman's intentions, Xiao Ta was instantly terrified out of his wits. Fuck. Women. You can kill them, but you can't humiliate them. The woman in the bamboo pavilion paid no attention to Xiao Ta, and she started to exert force instead. As soon as she exerted force, Xiao Ta instantly became illusory. Xiao Ta was horrified. At this moment, the woman in the bamboo pavilion frowned because she noticed that she actually couldn't pull them out even with her strength. At this moment, a ray of sword light suddenly slashed over. The woman in the bamboo pavilion turned around and blocked with her arm. Bang! The ray of sword light shattered. In the next moment, the woman in the bamboo pavilion punched out with her arm. Bang! A shadow instantly flew out. It was Yi Xian's soul. As soon as Yi Xian's soul stopped, he instantly became illusory. If it wasn't for the green profound sword, then this attack was sufficient to destroy his soul. After he stopped, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes, and the green profound sword suppressed his soul madly. In the distance, the woman in the bamboo pavilion didn't pull out Xiao Ta's horns anymore. She suddenly punched Xiao Ta's body. Bang! Xiao Ta trembled violently, and fine cracks appeared on his body. The woman in the bamboo pavilion didn't stop, and she punched Xiao Ta again. Bang! Xiao Ta's body trembled again, and the fine cracks gradually grew larger. Just like that, the woman in the bamboo pavilion pounded Xiao Ta madly. It was very obvious that she intended to shatter Xiao Ta completely. Right at this moment, Yi Xian spoke abruptly, "Little soul, fuse with me." As soon as he finished speaking, he fused completely with the green profound sword. In the next moment, he suddenly opened his eyes. At the same time, a sword slashed down towards the woman in the bamboo pavilion. A single strike to the soul. The woman in the bamboo pavilion's fist that was originally smashing towards Xiao Ta suddenly changed direction, and then it directly smashed towards Yi Xian's sword. Bang! The sword shook violently, and then it collapsed into pieces. However, the woman in the bamboo pavilion suddenly frowned. In the next moment, her soul was about to leave her body, but it instantly returned to her body. She gazed at Yi Xian, and then she picked up Xiao Ta and tossed it at Yi Xian. This toss caused Xiao Ta to be instantly set ablaze. Its strength was too terrifying. In the distance, Yi Xian's pupils constricted abruptly. With a command in his heart, the green profound sword suddenly flew out from his soul, and then it blocked in front of him. Xiao Ta directly collided with the green profound sword and shield. Bang! The sword and the pagoda howled in pain. Yi Xian opened his palm, and Xiao Ta appeared in his hand. At this moment, Xiao Ta's aura was extremely weak. Xiao Ta's voice trembled, "Young master, it's been hundreds of thousands of years. I've never been bullied like this." A trace of guilt flashed in Yi Xian's eyes. "I'm sorry." As he spoke, he was about to put Xiao Ta away. However, Xiao Ta said, "Young master, I'm going to die either way. I want to die in battle and fight this woman to the death." Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Are you sure?" Xiao Ta hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "It's fine as long as you don't sell me out." Yi Xian was speechless. Meanwhile, the woman suddenly clenched her right hand tightly, and the pitch-black space here instantly started burning. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly when he witnessed this scene, and a wisp of a ferocious expression flashed through his eyes as he gazed at the woman. He opened his palm, and the green profound sword appeared in his grasp. In the next moment, his soul started burning. He was fighting desperately. What was fighting desperately? It was courting death. He was very clearly aware that there was a huge gap between their strengths, so he wouldn't have a chance at all if he didn't fight desperately. When his soul started to burn, Yi Xian's aura rose explosively. He gazed at the woman, and the latter had a calm expression on her face. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes, and then the green profound sword in his hand suddenly vanished. He'd slashed the future with his sword. In the distance, the woman slowly closed her eyes. In the next moment, her right hand suddenly slashed towards the right. With this slash, a hole was torn open in the barrier of time, and a sword was slashing towards her from within that hole. It was the green profound sword. She could see the flow of time in the future. Yi Xian was shocked when he witnessed this scene, and he hurriedly issued a command in his heart to withdraw the green profound sword that was about to slash towards the woman. The woman stared at Yi Xian, just as she said, "I'm the only one left from the solitary mystery path. Since I'm all alone, then why should I worry about anything?" As she spoke, she slowly clenched her right hand, and then she punched once more. Countless strands of mysterious energy suddenly surged towards Yi Xian like tidewater, and they intended to crush him into pieces. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Yi Xian's eyes. This time, he didn't choose to defend himself. The best defense was offense. Yi Xian issued a command in his heart, and then a few 100,000 energy swords instantly appeared around him. In the next moment, those energy swords tore through the surroundings. Hiss! 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 In an instant, ear-piercing tearing sounds resounded throughout the starry sky. Yi Xian's surroundings suddenly started burning. Death! At this moment, there was only a single thought in his mind. If he couldn't defend himself against this punch, he would definitely die. This was because he was currently a soul, and his soul was extremely weak. If he couldn't win, he would die. As he thought of this, the green profound sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly trembled violently. In the next moment, he suddenly charged forward, drew his sword, and slashed. A sword of life and death. If he didn't live, he would die. As soon as Yi Xian's sword landed, his entire body was sent flying. At the same time, a powerful force directly blasted his soul. Boom! In an instant, Yi Xian's soul started burning, and then it started to vanish at a speed visible to the naked eye. On the last day of this month, I'm begging for votes. If you don't vote, and he doesn't vote, when will I be able to make a name for myself? Chapter 2168. His soul was vanishing. Yi Xian closed his eyes slowly. At this moment, he felt like he was about to disappear from this world. Even now, he didn't call for help. King Kaoshan. That was the nickname Heaven's hatefulness had given him. However, no one knew that he really disliked this nickname. Without Qing, and his dad, would he be unable to survive in this world? The facts proved that it was indeed so. Reality was cruel. Temper? It was fine to have a temper, but a temper without strength was useless. But a person couldn't lose his temper and his guts. Otherwise, what was the point of living? Be indifferent to life and death, fight if you're not satisfied. It sounded awesome, but there was a price to pay. There were many people in this world who had a temper and guts, but their strength didn't allow them to do things without regard for the consequences. There were far too many injustices in this world, and not everyone could resist such injustice. Just like now. The woman in black had tried to assassinate him and then humiliated him. How could he tolerate that? If he couldn't tolerate it, then he would fight. But if Qing and his dad didn't show up, then what would the result be? The result would be that he would be beaten up and his life would end. That was reality. But Yi Xian didn't regret it. Didn't people live to live? If they didn't die, they would live for thousands of years. Yi Xian suddenly laughed madly, and then he drew his sword and slashed. This was his last strike. There was no breakthrough before death, and then his strength would skyrocket to beat his opponent. This strike was very weak. It was so weak that the woman in bamboo looked down on it. After that strike, Yi Xian's soul became more and more illusory, and his consciousness became more and more blurry. At this moment, the woman in the bamboo house suddenly charged forward and punched towards Yi Xian, who turned completely illusory. At this moment, Yang Nianxue suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She flipped her palm, and a talisman flew out. The talisman expanded in the wind and transformed into a ray of golden light that shot towards the woman in bamboo. The woman frowned and waved her sleeve. Boom! The golden light shattered and the bamboo woman was sent tumbling backwards 10,000 feet. When she came to a stop, Yi Xian and Yang Nianxue had already disappeared. The bamboo woman's eyes narrowed when she saw this. Fleeing? As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly stomped her right foot and vanished on the spot. Chi! In the distance, a huge hole was torn in space-time. At the end of the distant starry sky, Yang Nianxue carried Yi Xian on her back as she ran. A green light flashed under her feet, so her speed was extremely fast. Yang Nianxue's expression was incomparably grave. "Brother, how are you doing?" Yi Xian did not answer. Although his soul was being suppressed by the green profound sword, his soul was too weak. At this moment, his consciousness was gradually blurring. Yang Nianxue's face instantly sank when she saw that Yi Xian didn't answer her. She turned around and glanced behind her. A formidable aura was getting closer and closer to her. Yang Nianxue ran as fast as she could, her voice trembling. "Dad, you can hear me, right?" In the distant endless starry sky, the azure-robed man stood in the starry sky. He held a sword in his left hand and remained silent. Beside him, a woman held his hand tightly. It was Su Qingshi. Su Qingshi looked at the azure-robed man and said softly, "Is it difficult?" The azure-robed man nodded slightly and said softly, "Do you think I'm cruel?" Su Qingshi was silent. The azure-robed man said softly, "Qingshi, I've wanted him to be an ordinary person more than once and let him live a carefree life. But this child, although he's flashy, his blood is very similar to mine. He can't take it. With his personality, if he doesn't have the support of powerful strength, he'll live a miserable life in the future. Moreover." As he spoke, he shook his head and did not speak anymore. Su Qingshi was silent. Why did the eagle cruelly push its cub off the cliff time and time again? Because it wanted its cub to have the ability to fly so that it could survive in this world. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the azure-robed man's side. "How can one achieve Tao without suffering?" Su Qingshi turned around and saw two women slowly walking over from afar. Seeing the two women, the azure-robed man smiled bitterly. "Sister Xiao. Little Tian." It was Tian Xiao. Tian Xiao glanced at the azure-robed man. "Your son is flashy every day. If he doesn't suffer, he'll only be a second-generation heir in the future. Feeling sorry for him now is really harming him." Qi Bai Tian shook his head. "Tian Ming has spoiled him too much." Tian Ming. Everyone here fell silent when they heard this. This was once their greatest enemy. It was impossible to reason with this woman. At this moment, Su Qingshi suddenly frowned. Why hasn't Tianming made a move yet? Hearing this, the green-robed man narrowed his eyes. He suddenly turned his head and his gaze pierced through countless galaxies, arriving at the Milky Way galaxy. However, just as his gaze was about to enter the Milky Way galaxy, a mysterious force blocked his vision. The azure-robed man raised his brows slightly and gently raised his thumb. A ray of sword light directly tore through the endless starry sky and pierced into the Milky Way. Chi! A hole was directly torn in the Milky Way. The azure-robed man saw the woman in a plain dress. The woman in a plain dress sat in front of a chessboard in a noisy square. The square was filled with people, and it was very bustling. The woman in the plain dress picked up a white chess piece and placed it down. Just as her chess piece was placed down, a black chess piece was placed right after. However, there was no one in front of her. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly when she saw the black ghost stone descend. Meanwhile, a voice resounded in front of her. You want to save him? The woman fell silent. The voice smiled and said, Sir Tianming, can you really protect him forever? The woman looked in front of her. Yes, I can kill you. The voice roared with laughter. Sir Tianming, I have to admit that you're really very strong. Strong to the point even I feel that it's unusual. However, you know better than anyone that this matter won't end even if you kill me. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stayed in this dimension for so long without acting. Tianming fell silent. The voice continued, Actually, I used to be confused about the meaning of life. It wasn't until I came to this Milky Way galaxy that I suddenly realized that the reason why life has meaning is because everything is unknown. Only the unknown has meaning. Tianming shook her head. Life has meaning because it has an end. Only with an end can the process have meaning. Without an end, life is meaningless. The voice fell silent. Tianming suddenly stood up, threw a white ghost stone, and turned to leave. This time, it's a draw. After taking 2 steps, her voice came again. Remember, the reason why my life has meaning is because my brother is alive. If he dies, then my life will have no meaning. If my life has no meaning, then is there any meaning to the existence of this universe? The voice said, Are you threatening me? Tianming didn't even turn her head. Isn't my threat obvious enough? The voice. In the starry sky, Yang Nianxue carried Yi Xian on her back as she ran. Yang Nianxue said with a trembling voice, Dad, are you really going to watch him die? There was no response. Yang Nianxue said again, Tianming. Your brother is about to be beaten to death. There was still no response. Yang Nianxue's face instantly turned pale when she witnessed this scene. Brother, you've been abandoned. Meanwhile, the space behind her was suddenly torn into pieces, and then a fist tore through the air towards her. Yang Nianxue was shocked. She hurriedly turned around, withdrew a talisman, and tossed it over. Bang! A terrifying force erupted from the talisman and smashed against the fist. Rumble! The fist shook violently and exploded apart, and the powerful impact blasted Yang Nianxue and Yi Xian over 100 kilometers away. Yang Nianxue had just stopped moving, and she carried Yi Xian on her back as she flew forward again. Yang Nianxue hadn't vanished for long when the woman from the bamboo pavilion appeared here. She frowned slightly as she gazed at Yang Nianxue who'd vanished, and then she vanished on the spot. Hiss! Countless spatial barriers in the distance were torn apart. Continue chasing after her. At the end of the starry sky, Yang Nianxue turned around and glanced over, and then her face instantly fell. That woman has no intention of stopping at all. Yang Nianxue spoke solemnly, Brother, I can't stop her. I want to leave you here and run by myself. If you have any objections, then just let me know. Yi Xian was at a loss for words. Yang Nianxue hurriedly said when she noticed that Yi Xian was silent, so you don't have any objections? If you don't, then I'll put you down. She was about to put Yi Xian down when Yi Xian suddenly spoke weakly, Big sister. I think I can still be saved. Big sister. Yang Nianxue's heart instantly softened, and she withdrew another talisman and crushed it. In an instant, a strand of mysterious energy surged into Yi Xian's soul, and Yi Xian's green sword was ceaselessly healing Yi Xian's soul. Time. Yang Nianxue turned around to look. She knew that she had to buy time for Yi Xian. Suddenly, Yang Nianxue's pupils constricted, and she hurriedly stopped. As soon as she did, the space in front of her had split apart, and then a woman walked out from within it. It was the woman from the bamboo pavilion. The woman gazed at Yang Nianxue. Yang Nianxue suddenly opened her palm, and then a talisman flew out from her palm. It was like a sharp arrow that instantly arrived before the woman from the bamboo pavilion. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly as she smashed her fist forward. Bang! The talisman was instantly blasted apart, but she herself was pushed almost 300 m back as well. After she stopped, she glanced at her fist, and it was completely mangled. The woman frowned when she witnessed this scene. In the next moment, she swiftly raised her head, and then her figure shot forward like a cannonball. Yang Nianxue stopped again at the end of the starry sky, and she just stopped when the woman from the bamboo pavilion appeared in front of her again. Yang Nianxue's expression was extremely unsightly. She couldn't compare to the woman in terms of speed. The woman gazed at Yang Nianxue. I think that you can't possibly have a lot of such talismans, right? Yang Nianxue spoke indifferently. I don't have a lot, just a few thousand. As she spoke, she flipped her right hand, and a few thousand talismans appeared in her grasp. The woman's expression froze when she witnessed this scene. Xiao Ta's voice suddenly trembled as he spoke. This is a true second generation. Chapter 2169. A few thousand talismans. The woman's face fell when she saw the talismans in Yang Nianxue's hand. The might of those talismans was extraordinary, so she didn't dare underestimate them. Yang Nianxue suddenly said, Xiao Ta, take your young master into the pagoda to recuperate. Xiao Ta hurriedly took Yi Xian into the pagoda. Yang Nianxue gazed at the woman with an emotionless expression. I didn't really want to use these talismans because my father said that I only know how to use external objects. She shook her head at this point. Woman, let me see how good you are at fighting. As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her palm, and a talisman suddenly flew out. Hiss! A ray of golden light tore through the surroundings. The woman remained expressionless as she punched forward. Bang! The ray of golden light was instantly obliterated, but another ray of golden light shot over in the next moment. The woman frowned slightly, and then she slowly closed her eyes. A moment later, her body became illusory. She slashed forward. Yang Nianxue's eyes immediately narrowed when she saw the woman's body turn illusory. In the next moment, she opened her palm, and an ancient mirror appeared in it. The ancient mirror suddenly flew above her head, and then a strange ray of light enveloped her. Bang! In an instant, Yang Nianxue's body became illusory. Meanwhile, the woman suddenly raised her head to look at Yang Nianxue, and her eyes narrowed slightly. You're not in the past. Yang Nianxue spoke indifferently. Do you know what mirror this is? It's the divine spatial mirror. Under its illumination, no one will be able to slash my past or see into my future. The bamboo woman glanced at the time-space divine mirror above Yang Nianxue's head. She slowly clenched her right hand. In the next moment, she suddenly rushed forward and punched at Yang Nianxue. What welcomed her was a large number of talismans. Yang Nianxue tossed out talismans like a madman, and it didn't take long for the river of stars to seethe and burn. Under the frenzied bombardment of Yang Nianxue's talismans, the bamboo woman was blasted back repeatedly. Those talismans weren't ordinary talismans, and they were extremely formidable. Of course, it was mainly because there were so many of them. Roughly 15 minutes later, the talismans in Yang Nianshue's hands became fewer and fewer, and her expression became more and more solemn. Although those talismans could repel the bamboo woman, they couldn't kill her. Not long after, Yang Nianshue's last talisman was used up, and it was easily shattered by a punch from the bamboo woman in the distance. The bamboo woman looked at Yang Nianshue. "Anything else?" Yang Nianshue shook her head. "No." The bamboo woman was expressionless. "Then it is time for you to die." As soon as she finished speaking, she charged forward and punched Yang Nianshue, and the powerful force of her punch instantly enveloped Yang Nianshue. Yang Nianshue's expression was calm. When the woman arrived in front of her, Yang Nianshue suddenly opened her palm, and a small haul appeared in her hand. In the next moment, a ray of sword light suddenly flew out from within the small haul. Boom! The bamboo woman was instantly sent flying thousands of feet away by the sword light. After she stopped moving, she gazed at her right hand, and there was a deep injury on it. Her eyes narrowed slightly when she noticed the injury on her right hand, and then she raised her head to look at Yang Nianshue. At this moment, the small haul in Yang Nianshue's hand suddenly flew up slowly. As soon as it flew into the air, it expanded explosively and transformed into a huge hall. There were two large words above the entrance to the hall: Sword Hall. The Sword Hall. The bamboo woman frowned slightly. "What divine treasure is that?" Yang Nianshue's face remained expressionless. "The Sword Hall. The Sword Hall." The bamboo woman shook her head. "I've never heard of it." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly charged forward and punched Yang Nianshue. This punch was covered in a light that was dazzling like the sun. As soon as she punched forward, the boundless starry sky seethed once more. Meanwhile, a sword suddenly flew out from the hall above Yang Nianshue, and it slashed down from midair. Hiss! The light was instantly torn apart by the sword. A cold glow flashed through the bamboo woman's eyes. She didn't retreat but moved forward instead, and she smashed her fist towards the descending sword. Bang! A ray of light and a ray of light suddenly exploded apart. The sword was blasted flying while the bamboo woman was pushed over 1 kilometer back. After she stopped moving, she glanced at her right hand, and she noticed that it had actually been sliced open. The bamboo woman's brows knit together tightly when she witnessed this scene, and then she raised her head to look at the hall above Yang Nianshue. The sword from before had returned to the hall. Yang Nianshue gazed at the bamboo woman. "Do you still want to fight?" The bamboo woman glanced at Yang Nianshue. "Many divine treasures." Yang Nianshue nodded. "Indeed." Meanwhile, the bamboo woman suddenly said, "They're external objects in the end." As soon as she finished speaking, she slowly closed her eyes. At the same time, she pressed her palms together. Yang Nianshue's eyes narrowed slightly, and then she formed seals with both hands while silently chanting. Right at this moment, the bamboo woman suddenly opened her eyes and took a step forward. As soon as she took that step, her soul suddenly left her body, and then her body transformed into numerous afterimages. Moreover, her soul had transformed into numerous afterimages as well. Yang Nianshue sensed the aura of death in the distance, and her eyes opened wide. As soon as her voice resounded, 10 swords suddenly slashed out from within the hall. Hiss! 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 In an instant, countless rays of light surged like a waterfall and drowned the countless afterimages of the bamboo woman. But in the next moment, the rays of light suddenly shattered, and then the 10 swords were blasted flying. At the same time, an afterimage charged over to Yang Nianshue. Yang Nianshue's pupils constricted, and she hurriedly opened her right hand. A black shield appeared there. However, it had only just appeared when a hand grabbed her throat. The bamboo woman grabbed Yang Nianshue's throat and slammed her forward. Bang! Yang Nianshue's body instantly exploded apart, and only her soul remained. The bamboo woman stared fixedly at Yang Nianxue, who was in soul form. Do you have any more divine treasures? As she spoke, she slowly exerted force with her right hand. Right at this moment, a sword suddenly appeared behind her, and she immediately let go of Yang Nianxue before swiftly turning around and striking with her elbow. Bang! The sword was blasted flying. Moreover, a man stood not too far away from her. It was none other than Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's body had recovered, and so had his soul. Yi Xian gazed at the bamboo woman. I've been revived. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and the green profound sword suddenly vanished. In the distance, the bamboo woman raised her arm to block. Bang! The green profound sword was directly blocked flying. But in the next moment, another sword slashed over. The bamboo woman pointed out with a finger. Bang! The sword was instantly shattered. Meanwhile, Yi Xian was already by Yang Nianxue's side, and he gazed at the extremely weak Yang Nianxue. Big sister, are you all right? Yang Nianxue shook her head. I'm fine, I just almost died. Yi Xian spoke in a light voice. I'm sorry. Yang Nianxue shook her head slightly. Little brother, let's not chat. Think about how to deal with this woman. Yi Xian turned around to look at the bamboo woman in the distance. Needless to say, she was the most terrifying expert he'd encountered so far. His intuition told him that she hadn't even used her full strength. The bamboo woman gazed at Yi Xian, and then her figure suddenly floated up slowly. In an instant, countless strands of mysterious energy converged from the surroundings and surged into her body. Yi Xian frowned. This woman is going to use her ultimate move again. The bamboo woman gazed at Yi Xian, and she slowly clenched her right fist. Crack! Suddenly, countless bolts of lightning appeared above her. As soon as these bolts of lightning appeared out of thin air, a strand of monstrous might swept down from the sky. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and the green profound sword trembled violently before he vanished on the spot along with Yi Xian. He's gone. The bamboo woman was stunned when she witnessed this scene. Did he flee? In next to no time, she confirmed that Yi Xian had fled. The bamboo woman's expression instantly turned cold. How can he flee from a fight? In the next moment, the bamboo woman tore the space in front of her apart. Yi Xian utilized the green profound sword to return to the Celestial Treasure Pavilion. The expression of the branch president of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, Yu Xian, instantly became unsightly when he saw Yi Xian. He was already aware of what had happened between Yi Xian and the bamboo woman, and the reason he hadn't helped Yi Xian was because he knew the bamboo woman. The bamboo woman was said to be one of the 3 strongest fighters in the middle world. So, he'd decided to feign ignorance and hadn't chosen to bring others to help Yi Xian. What sort of person was Yi Xian? When he saw Yu Xian's expression, he knew what Yu Xian was thinking. Obviously, even though Chen Shi was an extraordinary VIP of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, Yu Xian wasn't willing to go against the bamboo woman for Chen Shi's sake. Yi Xian smiled and said, President Yu Xian, I didn't come here to ask you to help me go against the bamboo woman. I want you to help me protect something. Yu Xian hurriedly asked, what is it? Yi Xian opened his palm, and Xiao Ta appeared in his hand. Xiao Ta's voice trembled, Young Lord, you. What are you doing? Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Xiao Ta, both you and my sister are heavily injured. Both of you need to heal, especially my sister. Her physical body was destroyed and her soul was heavily injured. Xiao Ta immediately said, Young Lord, I want to live and die with you. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Listen to me. After that, he placed Xiao Ta in Yu Xian's hand, and then he turned around and flew away on his sword. However, as soon as he left the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, the bamboo woman appeared in front of him. In the hall, Yu Xian looked at Xiao Ta in his hand in silence. At this time, a middle-aged man appeared behind him, and he looked at Yi Xian, who was facing the bamboo woman. Are you sure you won't help? Yu Xian's expression was calm. Are you a match for Dao Xianyi? Dao Xianyi was the bamboo woman's name. The middle-aged man shook his head. Yu Xian said softly, although the solitary mystery path has been destroyed, Dao Xianyi is still here. If we help, this woman might kill us. The middle-aged man said in a deep voice, he has the Xiantian token. Yu Xian shook his head, just play dumb. After saying that, he hesitated. After all, the pavilion master has not appeared for a long time. The middle-aged man was silent. In the distance, Yi Xian looked at the bamboo woman in front of him. He did not say anything and directly ignited his physical body. Boom! Yi Xian's aura suddenly skyrocketed. However, it was not over yet. Yi Xian began to ignite his bloodline. Igniting the crazy demon bloodline. The moment he chose to ignite the crazy demon bloodline, a violent and murderous intent from the depths of his bloodline suddenly rushed into his sea of consciousness. Boom! In an instant, Yi Xian's eyes turned into a sea of blood. He had completely gone mad. This time, there were no fancy tricks. This time, he was ready to die. Chapter 2170. Crazed Demon Bloodline. After completely entering a berserk state, Yi Xian's aura instantly skyrocketed. At this moment, everyone within a radius of several million miles felt a terrifying killing intent. The hidden experts who had rushed over were all shocked. What kind of bloodline was this? It was actually so terrifying. In the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, Yu Xian looked at Yi Xian who was covered in blood in the distance and remained silent. At this moment, his heart was filled with shock. He was shocked by Yi Xian's strength. He had never thought that Yi Xian would be able to fight with Dao Xian for so long. Did Dao Xianyi go easy on him? Obviously not. Not simple. A complicated look flashed across Yu Xian's eyes. He knew that since Yi Xian was able to obtain the pavilion leader's approval, he was definitely not a simple person. However, he did not dare to gamble with the Celestial Treasure Pavilion's branch. If he lost the bet, not only would he die, the Celestial Treasure Pavilion branch would also disappear. He couldn't afford to gamble. In the distant sky, Dao Xuani looked at Yi Xian with a calm expression, but her right hand slowly clenched. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly looked at Dao Xuani. His eyes were like a sea of blood, and his killing intent was monstrous. All the experts in the surroundings retreated explosively. Because they realized that Yi Xian's killing intent was actually able to corrode their minds. In the sky, without any nonsense, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared from where he was. Qi! A ray of blood-red light flashed through the battlefield. This strike was mixed with boundless viciousness and killing intent. Dao Xian was expressionless. She took a step forward and punched towards Yi Xian. With this punch, everything around her was annihilated. The powerful fist force shook the entire middle world. Both of them chose to fight head-on. Boom! A blood-colored sword light suddenly erupted from the horizon. Subsequently, both of them retreated at the same time. However, Dao Xian stopped after retreating several hundred feet, whereas Yi Xian retreated several thousand feet. Dao Xianyi looked at her right hand. There were countless cracks on it. Seeing this, Dao Xuani frowned deeply. She realized that Yi Xian's strength had become much stronger. Moreover, Yi Xian's aura was getting stronger and stronger. Dao Xianyi looked at Yi Xian who was in the distance. In the next moment, she suddenly vanished on the spot. Dao Xianyi suddenly stomped her foot on top of Yi Xian's head, and when her foot descended, the space in front of her instantly caved in. Boom! Yi Xian didn't even have the time to react before he was stomped into a boundless spatial abyss. As soon as he stopped moving, an afterimage suddenly flashed over to him, and then a fist that carried monstrous might and force smashed towards his head with the intention of smashing his head apart. This time, Yi Xian did not choose to dodge. Instead, he directly stabbed his sword at Dao Xuanyi's abdomen. However, Dao Xuanyi did not choose to dodge either. Bang! Qi! Yi Xian's body crumbled, and his soul retreated hundreds of thousands of feet. At the same time, Yi Xian's sword pierced Dao Xuanyi's abdomen. Just as the green profound sword was about to suppress Dao Xuanyi's soul, a powerful force shook the green profound sword out of his body. Dao Xuanyi closed her eyes slowly, and her soul became illusory. Even though the sword had been shaken out of her body, it had still caused a heavy injury to her soul. She'd been slightly careless this time. Because she hadn't expected that the sword would be able to restrain the soul. She'd thought that the sword was only slightly sharper. In the distance, after Yi Xian's body shattered, he opened his palm, and the green profound sword appeared in his grasp before he suddenly vanished on the spot. Hiss! A ray of blood-red light flashed through the battlefield. It tore through everything. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi suddenly raised her head, and then she charged forward and smashed her fist forward. Swish! This punch tore through everything before it. Bang! Yi Xian was blasted flying along with his sword. However, a sword suddenly slashed towards Dao Xuanyi in the next moment. A wisp of icy coldness flashed in Dao Xuanyi's eyes, and she raised her arm to block it. Bang! The sword was blasted away. In the next moment, she was about to attack again. However, another sword slashed towards her. Dao Xuanyi's eyes narrowed slightly. Her right palm slowly returned to the space between her brows. In the next moment, she charged forward, and her palm slashed down like a blade. Bang! The sword was slashed into pieces. At the same time, a palm suddenly slashed down from above Yi Xian's head. Yi Xian issued a command in his heart, and the green profound sword transformed into a sword shield that blocked above his head. Bang! The sword shield shook violently, and Yi Xian's soul fell from the sky. Suddenly, Dao Xuanyi appeared in front of Yi Xian like a ghost, and she pointed at the space between Yi Xian's brows. Yi Xian closed his eyes slowly, and the green profound sword suddenly returned to the sheath in his hand. In the next moment, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. This wasn't an ordinary slash. It was slashing the future, the present, and the past. 3 swords as one. As soon as Yi Xian attacked, Dao Xuanyi immediately frowned. However, she didn't withdraw her finger. Instead, she stomped her right foot on the ground, and her strength increased once more. Bang! Yi Xian was blasted flying along with his sword, but Dao Xuanyi retreated over 1 kilometer as well. Not only that, her right hand was directly torn apart by Yi Xian's attack, and she'd almost lost an arm. At the same time, there was a blood-red sword scar between her brows. Dao Xuanyi stared fixedly at the distant Yi Xian. She noticed that Yi Xian's sword was much stronger than before. Under normal circumstances, even if Yi Xian slashed the past, the future, and the present, it would still be impossible for him to injure her. But it was different now. After Yi Xian's bloodline energy was activated, his strength was completely different from before. Pure bloodline energy. At this moment, Dao Xuanyi had a trace of doubt in her heart. I've already destroyed Yi Xian's physical body, so why does he still have bloodline energy? Could it be that his bloodline isn't in his physical body, but in his soul? I can't figure it out. She didn't think about it either. Dao Xuanyi slowly clenched her right hand, and she was just about to attack. However, right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly became illusory. Slash over. Dao Xuanyi's eyes narrowed slightly, and then she suddenly raised her arm to block. Bang! An expanse of blood-red sword energy suddenly erupted, and Dao Xuanyi was pushed back by over 1 kilometer. Moreover, as soon as she stopped moving, her right arm flew into the air. It was severed. The experts in the shadows were astounded when they witnessed this scene. Has Yi Xian's strength grown stronger again? Dao Xuanyi stared fixedly at Yi Xian, who stood in the distance. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly raised his sword and slashed over fiercely. The blood-red sword energy contained boundless vicious energy and killing intent, and even Dao Xuanyi couldn't help but frown. The killing intent and vicious energy were so strong that they were unprecedented. When facing Yi Xian, who was growing stronger and stronger, Dao Xuanyi didn't dare underestimate him in the slightest. Her left hand suddenly stretched forward, and then she formed a strange seal. In the next moment, she moved forward lightly. This movement caused the space around her to suddenly erupt like a volcano that had been accumulating energy for a few tens of thousands of years, and then a formidable force surged out from her at the center. Bang! The blood-red sword energy shattered, and then Yi Xian was pushed back repeatedly. At the same time, the entire river of stars started seething, and then it was incinerated and obliterated. The entire middle world was shocked. Because their battle had harmed the quintessence of the middle world. Meanwhile, an old man suddenly appeared here. He glanced at Yi Xian, and then he gazed at Dao Xuanyi, Supreme Xuanyi. You've harmed the quintessence of this world. Dao Xuanyi glanced coldly at the old man. Mu Xian, this isn't related to your world sect. Mu Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, Supreme Xuanyi, all of us Supreme Exalts had an agreement that no one is allowed to harm the quintessence of this world. Now that you've... Dao Xuanyi stared fixedly at Mu Xian. My solitary profound sect has perished, so why should I care about all of that? Tell them that I'll beat up anyone who dares to stop me, and I stand by my word. As soon as she finished speaking, she charged towards Yi Xian, who was standing in the distance. Mu Xian sighed softly on the spot. He'd finally realized what was going on. Dao Xuanyi didn't care anymore. Because if they really tried to stop her, then she would beat them up as well. After all, a mad Supreme Exalted was no joke. Beat up Yi Xian? Mu Xian glanced at Yi Xian, who stood in the distance. He didn't know Yi Xian. However, based on the current situation, it was obvious that this young man's background wasn't simple at all. Especially that bloodline of his. That bloodline was too abnormal. Even though Yi Xian was still being suppressed by Dao Xuanyi, he wasn't completely powerless to fight back. Because even Dao Xuanyi didn't dare rashly go head-on against his green profound sword. The green profound sword that was enhanced by the energy of his bloodline was no joke, and it could probably even slash Xiao Ta apart. Moreover, because Yi Xian had fallen completely into a state of madness, he was endlessly enhanced by the energy of his bloodline. The madder he became, the stronger he became. The more he fought, the stronger he became. There was no upper limit. This was the most terrifying aspect of his mad devil bloodline. Right at this moment, Yi Xian was suddenly blasted back by Dao Xuanyi's punch, and as soon as he stopped, a ray of sword energy slashed towards Dao Xuanyi without any warning. Dao Xuanyi suddenly struck with her elbow. Bang! The ray of sword energy was directly shattered by her, but her right elbow had split open, and her bones were visible. Dao Xuanyi looked at her elbow in silence. In the distance, Yi Xian started to reconstruct his physical body as soon as he stopped. With his current strength, it was quite easy for him to reconstruct his physical body. However, the reconstructed physical body would not have the dreadful defensive ability it had before. Every time his body was destroyed, he would have to reconstruct it. However, Yi Xian didn't care. Because even his previous body couldn't resist Dao Xuanyi's terrifying strength. It didn't make much of a difference now. Meanwhile, Dao Xuanyi suddenly moved slowly to take down the bamboo house behind her. Mu Xian's expression instantly changed when he saw that, and he hurriedly stopped her. Supreme Xuanyi, you mustn't. What you're doing is destroying this world. You'll become the greatest sinner of the middle world. Dao Xuanyi ignored Mu Xian. She opened the bamboo house, and there was a ruler within it. It was very short, only as long as an arm. Dao Xuanyi picked up the ruler and said softly, "Master, you once told me to give in to everything I do. So, you use the infinite ruler to seal 40% of my strength so that I can never be complacent." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian, who was covered in blood, and said, "I'll die if I kill this person, but I have no regrets." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly picked up the infinite ruler and lightly tapped the space between her brows. Bang! In an instant, Dao Xuanyi's aura skyrocketed, and a powerful aura instantly swept through the entire middle world. Dao Xuanyi had completely recovered his strength. The most terrifying super genius in the history of the solitary mystery path. Moreover, he was holding the most terrifying super divine artifact of the solitary mystery path, the infinite ruler. The ruler could measure the past and the present, and it could suppress time. Chapter 2171. Mu Xian's expression turned extremely ugly when he saw Dao Xuanyi had recovered his strength. They had always been very afraid of Dao Xianyi because they knew that Dao Xianyi had always been suppressing his strength. But now, Dao Xuanyi had recovered his strength, and with the infinite divine ruler in her hand, he wasn't worried about Yi Xian's life or death, but the life or death of the entire middle world. Once the middle world's quintessence was destroyed, the impact on them would be fatal. Dao Xuanyi's sect had been destroyed, so he didn't care, but they had to care. Stop Dao Xuanyi? Mu Xian immediately rejected the idea. Dao Xuanyi didn't care anymore. If he stopped her, she might go crazy and hit him, and that would be embarrassing. Mu Xian turned to look at Yi Xian in the distance. What if Yi Xian disappeared? Mu Xian's gaze gradually turned cold. In the distance, Yi Xian held the green profound sword tightly in his right hand. His bloodline aura was still rising madly, but compared to Dao Xuanyi's current aura, it seemed very weak. Dao Xuanyi looked at Yi Xian in the distance, slowly clenched his right hand, and without a word, he directly punched. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Bang! A wave of sword light shattered, and Yi Xian and his sword were instantly thrown into a boundless spacetime abyss. Although this punch was only aimed at Yi Xian, the world around him instantly became illusory. At this moment, a huge dragon suddenly appeared in the depths of the starry sky. It looked down at Dao Xuanyi, and its voice carried a terrifying pressure. "Supreme Xuanyi, did you destroy this world?" Super spiritual vein. The huge dragon before him was the leader of the 36 spiritual veins, the spiritual dragon. Dao Xuanyi glanced coldly at the spiritual dragon. "Today, I'll only kill one person. Supreme spiritual dragon, don't provoke me." As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at Yi Xian in the distance, and without a word, he punched again. In the distance, in the boundless spacetime abyss, Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward, drew his sword, and slashed. One sword slashed the past, one sword slashed the present, and one sword slashed the future. 3 swords combined into one. Boom! As soon as Yi Xian's sword fell, 3 sword lights exploded in front of him. Yi Xian retreated again. Moreover, when he stopped this time, his physical body was annihilated without a sound. He couldn't block it. Dao Xuanyi stared at Yi Xian, whose soul seemed to be a little illusory. "I know your background isn't simple. Why don't you call for help?" In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and the green profound sword trembled slightly. In the next moment, his soul burned. Soul ignition. Seeing this scene, Dao Xuanyi's eyes narrowed slightly. What's the point of constantly overdrafting yourself? As soon as she finished speaking, her body slowly floated up, and she clenched her right hand tightly. In the next moment, she vanished on the spot. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly turned into a blood-red sword light and disappeared on the spot. Qi! The boundless abyss of space and time had suddenly started to burn. it couldn't withstand their strength at all. Dao Xuanyi's fist smashed onto Yi Xian's green profound sword. The green profound sword trembled violently, and a powerful force directly passed through the green profound sword to Yi Xian's soul. Boom! Yi Xian's soul instantly floated away like a piece of paper. However, at this moment, two sword lights appeared at the back of Dao Xuanyi's head and throat. Dao Xuanyi's expression was calm as he pressed his right hand down lightly. In an instant, an invisible force directly shattered the two swords. In the distance, Yi Xian's soul was still burning. Although his aura was getting stronger and stronger, and it was even stronger than when he burned his bloodline, his soul was also becoming more and more illusory. He couldn't defeat her. Even if he burned his bloodline and soul, he still couldn't defeat the woman in front of him. The gap between their strength was too huge. If this woman punched him again, his soul would definitely be destroyed. At this moment, Soul suddenly said in a trembling voice, "Young lord, we'll meet again in the next life." As soon as it finished speaking, the green profound sword suddenly turned into a sword light and entered Yi Xian's soul. In the next moment, a terrifying force suddenly erupted from the green profound sword and spread out from Yi Xian's soul. It was devouring the green profound sword. To be more accurate, the green profound sword had self-destructed and voluntarily allowed itself to be devoured by Yi Xian. Because Yi Xian could devour swords. At this moment, the completely crazed Yi Xian seemed to have sensed something and suddenly trembled. In the next moment, he suddenly roared, "No!" His voice was filled with endless fear. He wasn't afraid of the enemy, but he was afraid that his loved ones had disappeared. The green profound sword was devoured on its own. In an instant, Yi Xian's aura directly erupted like a volcano. Boom! In an instant, the surroundings were completely ignited. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Dao Xuanyi in the distance. In the next moment, he charged over like a madman. There was no sword. At this moment, he was the sword. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi's expression was calm. He opened his palm, and the infinite God ruler appeared in his hand. He waved it lightly. Boom! The originally burning world was instantly extinguished. A ruler's shadow directly shook the charging Yi Xian. Boom! A wave of sword light suddenly erupted. Yi Xian and Dao Xuanyi retreated rapidly at the same time. This retreat directly took both of them hundreds of thousands of feet back. After Yi Xian stopped, rays of sword light continuously condensed around him. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi had just stopped when a sword suddenly slashed down from above her head. Dao Xuanyi opened his palm, and the infinite God ruler in his hand suddenly flew up and directly shattered the sword. But at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of her. Dao Xuanyi's pupils suddenly shrank. Since when did Yi Xian's speed become so fast? At this moment, Yi Xian's speed was at least 10 times faster than before. At this moment, Dao Xuanyi suddenly understood. Yi Xian had concealed his strength. No, he had concealed his speed. When his bloodline and soul were ignited, all aspects of Yi Xian's abilities were greatly enhanced. However, he had concealed his speed, and she had actually overlooked this. Therefore, at this moment, when Yi Xian absorbed the energy of the green profound sword, he stopped concealing his speed and caught her off guard. Most importantly, since the moment he ignited his bloodline, Yi Xian had been constantly suppressed by her. This caused her to subconsciously lower her guard. At this moment, Dao Xuanyi was unable to guard against it. Yi Xian used his right hand as a sword and directly stabbed into Dao Xuanyi's abdomen. Boom! Before everyone's eyes, Dao Xuanyi's physical body instantly shattered. However, at almost the same time, Dao Xuanyi's finger swiped at Yi Xian's eyes. Hiss! Both of them retreated explosively at the same time. When Yi Xian stopped, his eyes were gone. Not only that, but his soul was so illusory that it was almost transparent. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi's physical body was destroyed. Not only that, but there was also a sword stuck in her body. Although it was not the green profound sword, Yi Xian had used the soul fixation sword, and this sword directly suppressed Dao Xuanyi's soul. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi's eyes flashed ferociously. Immeasurable. As soon as she finished speaking, the immeasurable god ruler above her head suddenly fell and then entered her body. Boom! A terrifying aura erupted from Dao Xuanyi's body. In the next moment, the sword in her soul actually started to dissipate bit by bit. In the distance, Yi Xian's soul was also illusory. He did not dare to attack again because his current soul condition was even weaker than Dao Xuanyi's. He also started to recover his soul. Both of them chose to recover their souls. At this moment, countless experts in the middle world were extremely shocked because the battle between Yi Xian and Dao Xuanyi was too terrifying. The middle world could no longer withstand their strength. Countless earth veins had shattered, and underground magma had surged into the ground. This was only secondary. In some places, the spiritual energy had already started to dry up. The middle world's origin had been severely damaged. If this continued, the entire middle world would be destroyed. In the distance, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared beside Mu Xian. This person was the other supreme expert of the middle world, Mist Shan. At the same time, he was the sect master of another supreme sect, the Divine Cloud sect. Mist Shan glanced at Dao Xuanyi and Yi Xian in the distance, and his face was slightly gloomy. At this moment, the spirit dragon sovereign suddenly transformed into a middle-aged man and appeared beside Mu Xian and Mist Shan. The spirit dragon sovereign looked coldly at Yi Xian and Dao Xuanyi in the distance. Are you sure you won't stop them? Mu Xian and Mist Shan fell silent. Stop them? If they could, they would have done it a long time ago. The spirit dragon sovereign looked at Mu Xian and Dao Xuanyi. It won't be long before they recover again. At that time, they will start fighting again. As for the current situation in the middle world, you should know better than me. If this continues, the middle world's origin will be completely destroyed by them, and it might even cause the spiritual energy to dry up. No, it will definitely cause the spiritual energy to dry up. Both Mist Shan and Dao Xuanyi's faces turned slightly unsightly. The spirit dragon sovereign continued. Look, the countless earth veins in the middle world have started to collapse. If this continues, their strength will completely destroy all the earth veins in the middle world. It isn't just the earth veins, even the countless spirit veins in the middle world won't be able to withstand their strength and will be destroyed. At that time, our spirit hall leaf will be affected. As he spoke, his gaze gradually turned cold. Once there are no more earth veins and countless spirit veins here, I'll take the supreme spirit veins of our spirit hall and leave the middle world. Mist Shan and Mu Xian's expressions instantly changed when they heard this. The reason the spirit energy in the middle world was so dense was because of the 36 supreme spirit veins, and the reason the 36 supreme spirit veins were left in the middle world was because the middle world had the advantage of the natural earth veins and spirit veins. They could nourish the middle world, but they also needed the middle world to nourish them. They were complementary to the middle world. Once the 36 supreme spirit veins left, then at least 80% of the spirit energy in the middle world would instantly vanish. After that, the spirit energy in the middle world would dry up, and it wouldn't be long before the entire middle world would dry up and become a deathly silent universe. At this moment, Mu Xian suddenly said, "We can't let them continue fighting." Mist Shan looked at Mu Xian, and Mu Xian looked at Dao Xuanyi and Yi Xian expressionlessly. One of them must die. After a moment of silence, Mist Shan asked, "Who?" Mu Xian looked at Dao Xuanyi. It's too dangerous to choose her, because if she doesn't die, once she goes crazy and takes revenge. As he said this, he looked at Yi Xian, who was recovering his soul, and said, "He must die." Mist Shan said, "Do it." As soon as he said this, he and Mu Xian charged at Yi Xian. Obviously, they wanted to kill Yi Xian. Chapter 2172. Two supreme exalts had attacked at the same time. How could Yi Xian resist them? He couldn't resist them at all. Not to mention his current state, he wouldn't be able to resist them even if he was at his peak state. Right at this moment, a woman suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was Yang Nianxue. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Yang Nianxue's eyes. She opened her palm, and the sword palace suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot forward. It exploded. The sword hall exploded apart while countless rays of light erupted like fireworks. Mist Shan and Mu Xian were blasted back by the rays of light, and Yi Xian and Yang Nianxue had vanished when they finally stopped moving. Mu Xian and Mist Shan's expressions became extremely unsightly when they witnessed this scene. Mist Shan stared fixedly at the scene in the distance. He can't be allowed to live. They were fearful of Yi Xian as well because he was able to fight an exalted realm expert at such a young age. So, how terrifying would he be if he was allowed to grow? Actually, both of them were slightly regretful right now. Why did we interfere in this matter? Or perhaps, we could have done it in a different way. For example, we could have gotten a scapegoat to do it for us. Yet now, not only had they failed to kill him, they'd even formed an irreconcilable enmity with him. Mist Shan suddenly said, "He can't be allowed to live. Pursue him." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. On the other hand, Mu Xian charged forward as well. The expression of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion's branch president, Yu Xian, instantly became unsightly when he saw Yi Xian and Yang Nianxue flee. Actually, he didn't want Yi Xian to flee as well. Yi Xian was an extraordinary VIP of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion. According to the rules set by the Pavilion Master, he should protect Yi Xian with all his might. However, he'd chosen to watch from the sidelines just now. If Yi Xian had been killed, then the Pavilion Master would definitely not pursue the matter any further. After all, it wasn't worth it for a dead person. But now, Yi Xian had fled. The situation had changed again. After a long moment of silence, Yu Xian suddenly said, "Wu, ask your men to track him down." He paused for a moment and added, "At all costs." He was talking about Yi Xian. The middle-aged man called Wu spoke solemnly. Yu Xian said softly, "There's no way back. Once he dies, no one in this world will know that he is a distinguished guest of my Celestial Treasure Pavilion. Of course, if you find his whereabouts, don't make a move. Just contact Mu Xian and Supreme Mist Mountain and do them a favor." Wu fell silent for a moment, then he turned and left. In terms of intelligence, the Celestial Treasure Pavilion was incomparable to the other factions. In terms of intelligence, the Celestial Treasure Pavilion was incomparable to the major powers. Somewhere in the star field, Mu Xian and Lan Shan stopped. Their faces were extremely ugly. Wu Xian. Time to see. Their divine consciousnesses swept the surrounding star zones and the universe, but they did not find Yi Xian and Yang Nianxue. Lan Shan's face was extremely gloomy. How did they do it? Mu Xian shook his head. That woman possesses an extremely large number of mystical items. She's surely using some sort of divine item to conceal her aura. Lan Shan suddenly asked, "Who are these two people?" Both of them were stunned when they heard this. Who are they? They've overlooked this question. They're definitely not from the medium world. If they are, they would know. Supreme Xian Yi should know. Lan Shan said. They glanced at each other and vanished. When they reappeared, they were in the sky above the Celestial Treasure Pavilion. Xian Yi was still there. Mu Xian looked at him. Supreme Xian, who's that young man? Dao Xuani glanced at Mu Xian, then disappeared from the spot. Mu Xian frowned and looked at Lan Shan. What does she mean? She's ignoring you. Lan Shan said. Mu Xian said solemnly, we are helping her. Lan Shan shook his head. It doesn't matter who he is. Since we attacked him, we've sowed karma. If we don't want him to take revenge on us in the future, then we should deal with him before he leaves the city. A trace of worry flashed in Mu Xian's eyes. I'm worried that he has a powerful force behind him. Lan Shan furrowed his brows when he heard that. How could he not be worried? Meanwhile, Mu Xian shook his head. Let's not think about that. Since we've sowed karma, then let's face it calmly. What's there to be afraid of? He roared with laughter. Why should we fear anyone when our sects join forces? Hearing this, Lan Shan nodded. Indeed. Mu Xian said, our top priority now is to find those two and kill them. As soon as he finished speaking, he and Lan Shan vanished on the spot. The 9th floor of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion. Actually, no one had expected that Yang Nianxue didn't flee with Yi Xian. Instead, she brought Yi Xian to the 9th floor of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, the pavilion that belonged to the Pavilion Master. The most dangerous place was the safest. Of course, she'd used a divine object to conceal her and Yi Xian's auras. After Yang Nianxue entered the 9th floor with Yi Xian on her back, she glanced at the surroundings casually, and then placed Yi Xian on the ground. At this moment, Yi Xian's soul was still very weak. Yang Nianxue looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian was still exuding a terrifying murderous intent and evil aura. However, this murderous intent and evil aura were all suppressed by a tree core. The divine tree of life's tree core. She'd obtained it from an old man with a bamboo chest. It was capable of suppressing many evil existences. The killing intent and vicious aura belonged to the category of evil. Because of the divine tree of life's tree core, Yi Xian's mind was gradually returning to normal. After a long time, Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. Yang Nianxue asked softly, "Are you okay?" A trace of confusion flashed in Yi Xian's eyes. After a long time, he said softly, "Soul is gone." Soul. He just tried to contact Soul, but Soul had vanished completely. Yang Nianxue fell silent. She knew that Soul had followed Yi Xian for so many years, so their feelings for each other were definitely very deep. Yang Nianxue sighed softly. She hadn't expected that things would develop to this extent. She'd always thought that Tianming would intervene, but this time, he didn't. Did something happen to him? A trace of doubt arose in Yang Nianxue's heart. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Xiao Ta." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Ta appeared in front of him, and Yi Xian directly entered Xiao Ta's body. Healing. Reconstructing his body. Yang Nianxue walked to the window and looked down. At this moment, experts from the two sects were flying through the city from time to time. She knew that the two superpowers, the Cloud God sect and Tianyi sect, were madly searching for her and Yi Xian. Besides that, the members of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion's branch had been mobilized as well. Their targets were her and Yi Xian. Yang Nianxue frowned. Wasn't little brother a super VIP of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion? Is this super VIP really that low in status? As if she'd thought of something, Yang Nianxue suddenly turned to look at her surroundings. The 9th floor wasn't very spacious, but it was very elegant. There was a long table and a chair not too far away from her, and there was a bookshelf on the other side. Besides that, there was nothing else in the room. The Pavilion Master. She was quite curious about the Pavilion Master as well. After all, the Celestial Treasure Pavilion's business wasn't ordinary, and it had businesses throughout the universe. Yang Nianxue walked slowly to the bookshelf and picked up an ancient book. However, she'd never seen the words written on it. It's not from this world. Yang Nianxue frowned. She flipped through some more books, but they were all unfamiliar words. Yang Nianxue placed the book back on the bookshelf and walked slowly to the table. There was an ancient book on the table, and she understood the words written on it. Yang Nianxue picked up the ancient book and saw 3 words, Theory of the Universe. Beside the book was a pen. However, this pen was different from the pens in this world. It was rather short, and the tip of the pen was very, very sharp like a needle. A trace of surprise flashed in Yang Nianxue's eyes. This pen is quite unique. As she spoke, she flipped open the first page of the Theory of the Universe and read softly, What is the universe? It is the general term for all space, time, and matter. Seeing this, Yang Nianxue was silent for a moment before flipping to the second page. Space is boundless, time is boundless, and matter is boundless. When the 3 combine, it becomes the universe and the great Tao. It's completely possible to cultivate the way of godhood with science. Yang Nianxue hurriedly flipped to the next page. When she flipped to the next page, she was immediately stunned. There was a line of words on it. Sister, it's not good to barge into someone else's study without the owner's permission and peek at their books. Yang Nianxue's eyes were filled with disbelief. The other party actually knew that someone was here to peek? Yang Nianxue flipped to another page. Still want to read? Hehe, I won't let you read it. Yang Nianxue continued to flip. You really want to read it? If you answer correctly, I'll show you the secret code. Yang Nianxue flipped to another page. The Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger. Yang Nianxue's expression froze. What secret code is this? She flipped to another page, but it was completely blank. There was nothing at all. Yang Nianxue closed the ancient book and fell silent. She had to admit that she was slightly shocked at this moment. She suddenly realized that she seemed to have underestimated this mysterious master of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion. What exactly is his background? At this moment, Yang Nianxue suddenly turned around. There was a black box on the side of the study table. Yang Nianxue originally wanted to open it, but she seemed to have thought of something and stopped. Her actions just now were slightly offensive. A short moment later, Yang Nianxue placed the box back to its original position, and then she placed the ancient book back to its original position. She glanced at the surroundings, and a trace of complicated emotions flashed through her eyes. This pavilion master isn't simple at all. Without thinking too much, Yang Nianxue was about to enter the Xiao Ta. At this moment, Yi Xian walked out from the Xiao Ta. At this moment, his physical body had completely recovered. Not only had his physical body recovered, but his soul had also recovered. After all, the flow of time in the Xiao Ta was different from the outside world. Yang Nianxue asked softly, "You're done?" Yi Xian nodded. Yang Nianxue said, "Then let's go." Yang Nianxue suddenly looked around and walked to the bookshelf. He glanced at it and frowned slightly. He couldn't understand it. Yang Nianxue was about to say something when Yi Xian suddenly waved his right hand and moved the entire bookshelf into the Xiao Ta. Then, he walked to the study table and moved the table and chair into the Xiao Ta as well. Yang Nianxue's face darkened. "Brother, this isn't good." Yi Xian's face was expressionless. "I have the Xiantian token, so I can take anything in the Celestial Treasure Pavilion." Yang Nianxue was speechless. Everything in the world had karma. She didn't know if it was a good or bad karma. Chapter 2173. On the 9th floor, Yang Nianxue said in a low voice, "Brother, what are your plans?" Yi Xian was expressionless. "What plans can I have?" "Fight to the death, of course." Yang Nianxue wanted to say something but stopped. Yi Xian looked at Yang Nianxue. "Sister, you want to say that we can't beat that woman, right?" Yang Nianxue nodded. "That woman's strength is beyond our imagination. Moreover, the other 2 supremes are on her side. Not only that, the Celestial Treasure Pavilion seems to be on their side as well. The situation is very disadvantageous for us." As she spoke, she paused for a moment before continuing. "What I mean is, we have to temporarily avoid the brunt of the attack." Yi Xian was silent. He naturally understood Yang Nianxue's meaning. The siblings were no match for that woman. If they went to look for her, they would be sending themselves to their deaths. Yang Nianxue continued, "We can go find Dad." Yi Xian shook his head, "I will take revenge myself." As he spoke, he opened his palm and small tower appeared in his hand. Yi Xian looked at Yang Nianxue, "Sister, you can hide our auras, right?" Yang Nianxue nodded, "But not for long." Yi Xian asked, "How long?" Yang Nianxue said in a low voice, I'm afraid they will use some secret technique to find us." Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then he entered Xiaota. Time. What he needed now was time. Yi Xian came to a mountain peak, and he looked into the distance, his eyes a little dazed. When he fought with Dao Xian, not only did he ignite his bloodline, but he also ignited his soul. In the end, Xiaofan even let him devour it, but he still couldn't beat his opponent. This was the most despair he had ever felt. Xiaofan. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, his heart was still bleeding. At the same time, the bloodline in his body suddenly trembled, about to explode. Yang Nianxue appeared beside Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian, "Control your bloodline. The current you doesn't need to go crazy, you need to calm down, unless you want to call for help." Call for help. These two words were like a needle stabbing into Yi Xian's heart. He didn't know when it started, but whenever he ran into trouble, Qing'er would always lend a helping hand. Over time, he became more and more fearless. Because he was fearless, he became more and more flashy. This time, however, Qing'er didn't make a move. This was the first time he tasted despair. True despair. Even if he risked his life, he still couldn't change the outcome. This was how cruel the world was. Most of the time, you wouldn't necessarily get a satisfactory result just because you worked hard and risked your life. Yi Xian clenched his fists and forced himself to calm down. Anger was a sign of incompetence. Only an incompetent person would do something as meaningless as anger. After a long time, Yi Xian's blood gradually calmed down. Yang Nianxue's heart ached as she looked at Yi Xian. She knew that Soul's disappearance was a huge blow to Yi Xian. Xiaota didn't say anything else. This time, it was also a huge blow to it. In history, it and Yi Xian were in such a miserable state. Not only was Yi Xian hopeless, it was also in despair. That woman was really strong. Even when Soul took the initiative to let Yi Xian devour, Yi Xian's strength skyrocketed, he still couldn't do anything to her. Actually, it wanted Yi Xian to call for help more than once, because in its opinion, only Master and Tianming could kill that woman. However, it knew that Yi Xian wouldn't call for help. Because the current Yi Xian had already started to hate his flashy self. Flashy? It wasn't impossible. But, you must have the strength. Just like Dad, wasn't Dad also flashy? But Dad had the strength. Using a saying from the secular world, many times, the fart of a rich person was fragrant. Strength. Yi Xian took a deep breath. After self-reflection, he started to ponder. How could he defeat that Dao Xian? Strength? Even with his physical body and the green profound sword, he still couldn't defeat his opponent, let alone now. Divine power? Slash the past, slash the present, and slash the future couldn't do anything to him. After much thought, Yi Xian realized he had no chance of winning if he fought against his opponent. Even if he burned his soul and bloodline, he still would not win. Moreover, his intuition told him that Dao Xian still had some reservations. There was only one way left. Call for help. He could continue to be the second generation. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's lips suddenly curled up into a self-deprecating smile. Other than calling for help, what else could he do? At this time, Yang Nianxue walked to Yi Xian's side. She lightly patted the dust on Yi Xian's collar, and then said softly, "Don't blame yourself. Big sister will help you." Yi Xian looked at Yang Nianxue, and Yang Nianxue smiled slightly. "I can't defeat that woman, but I can help you become stronger." Saying that, she opened her palm, and 10 storage rings appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yang Nianxue looked at Yi Xian. "This is all of Big Sister's assets. Among them, there are some that Dad gave me, some that Little Bai gave me, some that Mother gave me, and some that I cheated myself." "Oh, no, I earned myself. Now, I'll give them all to you." Yi Xian shook his head slightly. "Big sister, I'm afraid I won't be able to make it at the last minute," Yang Nianxue suddenly said. "Brother, do you know what you're not as good as Dad?" Yi Xian fell silent. Yang Nianxue looked straight at Yi Xian. "Dad will never give up under any circumstances. Do you know how desperate Dad was when he faced heaven's will? 10,000 times more desperate than your current situation. Do you know how miserable we were back then? That year, Tendo and those divine beasts were instantly killed by heaven's will. Auntie Tian Xiao and Qi Bai Tian died in battle. 2 of heaven's will clones died in battle. Arya's soul was almost destroyed. Even senior Xiao Zi, who had never been defeated, couldn't even draw his sword when facing heaven's will. Dad was even hung up and beaten. But even so, Dad didn't give up. He really didn't give up. He can die, he can cry, but he will never give up easily. He won't give up until he dies." Yi Xian fell silent. Yang Nianxue said again, "I also feel very desperate when facing that Dao Xian Yi, but shouldn't we give it our all? At least we're still alive now." Yi Xian clenched his fists tightly. Suddenly, he slapped himself hard in the face. "Pa!" The sound of the slap resounded throughout Xiao Ta's world. Yi Xian's expression was terrifyingly calm. "Big sister, you're right. I'm still alive, why should I give up? How can I give up?" As he spoke, he gazed at the spatial rings in front of Yang Nianxue, and then he said, "Which ones are useful to me?" Yang Nianxue said, "All of them." Yi Xian nodded. He swept the spatial rings with his divine sense, and it didn't take long for all the divine treasures within them to enter his sea of consciousness. He instantly knew which ones were useful to him. A short moment later, Yi Xian opened his palm, and a heart appeared in his palm. Yang Nianxue said, "This is the tree heart of the divine tree of life. I obtained it from an old man who carried a bamboo box." Yi Xian nodded, and then he withdrew a white jade bottle. The white jade bottle contained Arya's blood. Yi Xian gazed at Arya's blood in his hand, and he pondered in his heart. "I have to attain the eternal immortal realm first. Only when my body is immortal, soul is immortal, and will is immortal would I be able to fight that woman. Because once I attain that realm, my strength will become even stronger after I ignite my body and soul. If I want to kill that woman, then I can only fight with my life on the line. I intend to ignite my body and soul directly." Yi Xian took out Arya's blood, and then he poured a drop down his throat. He was rebuilding his eternal immortal body. For the sake of suppressing the formidable strength within Arya's blood, he'd even swallowed the tree heart of the divine tree of life. Only with the tree heart's suppression would he be able to slowly absorb Arya's blood. This time, he didn't just swallow a single drop, but all 12 drops of blood within the bottle. This was Yang Nianxue's idea. Because his eternal immortal body was completely useless against Dao Xian Yi, and his body had to be even stronger. Otherwise, it would still be shattered by Dao Xian Yi. Besides Arya's blood, Yi Xian had also devoured countless treasures of heaven and earth. All of these treasures had been collected by Yang Nianxue in the past, and every single one of them was truly priceless. There were some that she couldn't bear to eat herself, such as the tree heart of the divine tree of life. She couldn't bear to eat it. It had to be said that watching Yi Xian eat her treasures of heaven and earth like he was eating cabbages, Yang Nianxue's heart ached a little. But when she remembered that he was her biological brother, she didn't think about it anymore. Biological brother. In fact, she hadn't spent much time with Yi Xian. The two of them hadn't been together since they were young, so it was impossible to say how deep their relationship was. But in the end, blood was thicker than water. Moreover, she still felt a little guilty towards Yi Xian. Because the green-robed man had let Yi Xian grow, but he had raised her generously. Since she was born, she had almost never suffered any hardships. After a long time, Yang Nianxue collected her thoughts. Looking at Yi Xian, whose body was slowly transforming, she said softly, "Brother, do your best." Time passed bit by bit. Yi Xian's physical body had completely transformed. His physical body had once again reached the immortal level. However, it was not over yet. He was constantly pushing his physical body. He wanted to push his physical body to the limit. His own limit. Or in other words, the limit of the immortal realm. Of course, it was painful. In fact, it was painful from the beginning. Arya's blood was no joke. Even with the tree heart of the divine tree of life suppressing it, he still felt like his body was immersed in scorching lava. However, this bit of pain was nothing to him. At this time, Yi Xian's body was slowly tearing apart. Seeing this scene, Yang Nianxue frowned slightly. What's going on? Yi Xian's body was tearing apart, but after tearing apart, it quickly healed, and then tearing apart again. This process repeated. Yang Nianxue said solemnly, "Qualitative change. Qualitative change." After Yi Xian's body reached the immortal realm, it underwent another qualitative change. What was the body above the immortal realm? Yang Nianxue didn't know. Because she didn't cultivate her body. At this time, Yang Nianxue's expression suddenly changed. The next moment, she left Xiaota and returned to the 9th floor. At the door, the sound of footsteps could be heard. Someone was coming. Chapter 2174. Who is it? Yang Nianxue stared fixedly at the staircase in the distance, and she slowly clenched her right fist. Right at this moment, a woman walked up to her. Yang Nianxue's face instantly sank when she saw the woman. Dao Xuani. This woman actually found me. Dao Xuani gazed at Yang Nianxue. Where is he? Yang Nianxue fell silent. Dao Xuani stared at Yang Nianxue in silence. Yang Nianxue suddenly smiled and said, "How did you find me?" Dao Xuani didn't speak. She slowly clenched her right fist, and then an invisible force enveloped Yang Nianxue. At this instant, Yang Nianxue sensed the aura of death. At this moment, Dao Xuani was at his peak state. Yang Nianxue was just about to speak when Dao Xuani suddenly punched at her. This punch was swift like a thunderclap, and it carried monstrous might. In the distance, Yang Nianxue's eyes narrowed slightly. She opened her palm, and a tiny wooden figure that held a sword appeared in her hand. Right when she was about to activate the tiny wooden figure, she suddenly noticed to her astonishment that the space before her had become illusory, and the terrifying force of Dao Xuani's punch had actually vanished without a trace. When Dao Xuani's punch arrived before Yang Nianxue, it had become soft and powerless. Both of them were stunned. What's going on? Both of their eyes were filled with disbelief. Meanwhile, Dao Xuani punched again, and a terrifying force instantly surged out from her fist. This punch was capable of shattering the heavens and the earth. However, in the blink of an eye, the force of that punch vanished completely, and it was another soft punch. At this moment, Dao Xuani's pupils constricted slightly. She turned to glance at the surroundings, and only now did she notice that this place was slightly strange. Yang Nianxue noticed it as well. The space here seemed to be different from the outside world. Meanwhile, Dao Xuani slowly closed her eyes. In an instant, the space around her rippled like water. After a long time, she seemed to have noticed something, and she frowned. Yang Nianxue glanced at Dao Xuanyi with a slightly strange expression. Her intuition told her that Dao Xuanyi couldn't break through the restrictions here. This restriction was definitely set up by the mysterious Pavilion Master. However, wasn't Dao Xuanyi and the mysterious Pavilion Master equally famous? Right at this moment, Dao Xuanyi suddenly opened her eyes. She opened her palm, and the infinite ruler appeared in her hand. In the next moment, she suddenly smashed the ruler forward. This ruler fell, but there was no movement. Dao Xuanyi's eyes narrowed slightly while her expression was rather unsightly. Right at this moment, she seemed to have noticed something, and her pupils constricted abruptly while she hurriedly blocked with the ruler in her hand. Boom! A powerful force suddenly crashed onto Dao Xian's long ruler. Bang! Dao Xuanyi was sent flying and crashed into the wall. However, the wall was not damaged at all. The entire 9th floor did not move at all. Rebound. She had just swung her qi, and it had all rebounded back to her. Yang Nianxue's expression turned slightly solemn when she saw this. It was too strange. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes turned grave. Meanwhile, Mu Xian and Lan Shan appeared here as well, and both of them were stunned when they saw Yang Nianxue. Mu Xian was about to attack when Lan Shan stopped him and gestured for him to look at Dao Xuanyi. Mu Xian gazed at Dao Xuanyi, and he was stunned when he saw the blood on the corner of Dao Xuanyi's mouth. Meanwhile, Yang Nianxue suddenly smiled and said, "Looks like the owner of this study doesn't like others fighting here." Dao Xuanyi gazed at Yang Nianxue. She didn't attack again, and she just closed her eyes slowly instead. The space around her gradually started to become illusory. Obviously, she intended to deal with the spatial restrictions here. As for Mu Xian and Lan Shan, they noticed something unusual about the situation here as well, and a trace of shock could be seen in their eyes. The mysterious Pavilion Master. Actually, they'd met the Pavilion Master in the past. All those years ago, when the Immortal Treasure Pavilion intended to open a branch here, the Pavilion Master had gone to them and asked for their help. They naturally didn't agree so easily. So, they'd fought the Pavilion Master, and the outcome was a draw. That was why the Pavilion Master of the Immortal Treasure Pavilion was said to be equally famous as Dao Xuanyi. It was because they thought that the Pavilion Master was an expert on the same level as them. But now it would seem like that wasn't the case at all. The Pavilion Master had concealed his true strength. Meanwhile, Dao Xuanyi's hand started to wave about swiftly, and the space here actually started to split apart and reform. Everyone watched as the space before Dao Xuanyi was split apart once more, and then Dao Xuanyi's hands moved faster and faster while the space here was changing faster and faster as well. However, Dao Xuanyi's countenance had turned slightly pale. Suddenly, the space within the study started to tremble violently. Yang Nianxue's brows knit together slightly. Is it about to be dealt with? Meanwhile, Dao Xuanyi suddenly pressed the fingers of his right hand together and tapped forward. Just this tap alone caused the space within the study to instantly ripple like a pebble that had fallen into water. Dao Xuanyi's expression suddenly eased up. Looks like it's been dealt with. Right at this moment, the space here suddenly split apart like a cube, and then it swiftly rearranged itself. In the next moment, their expressions changed drastically because they noticed that their cultivations were actually plummeting. In just a short period of a few breaths of time, their cultivations had dropped to 0. Moreover, all of them had become ordinary people at this moment. Ordinary people that were completely helpless. It was too terrifying. All of them were stunned. What's going on? Dao Xuanyi's eyes were filled with disbelief. Space-time backtrack. Space-time backtrack. Mu Xian and Lan Shan gazed at Dao Xuanyi when they heard this, and then Lan Shan spoke solemnly, "Miss Xuanyi, what does space-time backtrack mean?" Dao Xuanyi's eyes were filled with disbelief. It means that we've returned to the past and returned to the time when we were at our weakest. Such a divine ability. I'm afraid even the temporal master isn't able to accomplish it. Spacetime backtrack. Lan Shan and Mu Xian's expressions had become unsightly. How could it be played like that? Wouldn't that make them invincible in the world? Damn it. Lan Shan gazed at Yang Nianxue. Is the pavilion master protecting them? Mu Xian shook his head. I don't think so. It's the problem here. The pavilion master doesn't want anyone to fight here. The 9th floor. They knew that the 9th floor was where the pavilion master resided, and even members of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion weren't allowed to come here. Obviously, the pavilion master didn't want anyone to fight here. Dao Xuanyi gazed at Yang Nianxue in the distance with a calm gaze that carried killing intent. Yang Nianxue didn't speak. If you're weak, then don't act tough. If you can't win, then be a little cowardly. You won't suffer a loss. Meanwhile, Mu Xian spoke abruptly, go look for Yu Xian. He's the branch master here, so he definitely has a way. Both of them turned around and left once they finished speaking. Dao Xuanyi didn't leave. She was in the study, and there was a trace of confusion in her eyes as she looked at the surroundings. The pavilion master. Actually, she hadn't met the pavilion master in the past. However, everyone said that she and the pavilion master were once the two most capable women in the mid-world, and they were equally famous. Now it seemed like how ironic it was. The pavilion master's ability to use spacetime far surpassed hers. They weren't on the same level at all. Dao Xuanyi looked at the surroundings, and the confusion in her eyes grew. At this moment, she suddenly understood why her master had asked her to seal her cultivation. One couldn't be too complacent. It was like a cup, if it was too full, then it couldn't hold anything new. There was no limit to learning. There was no limit to martial arts. There was no limit to Dao. You say you're strong, but there's always someone stronger than you. Dao Xuanyi slowly closed her eyes. After a long time, she slightly bowed towards the inside of the study. This was respect. She wouldn't fight here anymore. After retreating to the door, Dao Xuanyi's cultivation level instantly recovered. At the same time, her aura suddenly skyrocketed. Seeing this scene, Yang Nianxue's expression instantly became extremely unsightly. Brother, this woman actually broke through. Damn it, I'm having a mental breakdown. Breakthrough. After Dao Xuanyi suffered a setback, not only did she not sink into depravity, but her state of mind broke through, and her strength increased by another level. What was a monster? This was a monster. What was a true expert? Those who could remain unfazed by honor and humiliation, and those who knew shame and bravely fought back were experts. All the hardships and difficulties in the world were stepping stones, not stumbling blocks. Outside the door, Dao Xuanyi's aura became stronger and stronger. Although there was no movement in the study, the outside was already boiling. The entire midworld was boiling. Supreme. What was a supreme? After eternal immortality was the supreme. Supreme was the meaning of the limit. It meant that one's physical body, divine soul, and will had reached their own limits. Under such circumstances, a person's physical body, divine soul, and will had reached an extremely terrifying level. It could be said that a supreme's physical body, divine soul, and will had already broken through their own limits. To achieve eternal immortality was not especially difficult, but to reach the limit, that was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Reaching the limit and reaching the limit, those were two different concepts. In the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, Mu Xian and Lan Shan suddenly raised their heads. When they saw Dao Xuanyi breaking through, their minds went blank. Broke through? Just like that? It had been 1,000 years since they reached the supreme level, and in these 1,000 years, they were still the supreme level. Because to break through again was too difficult. One must know that they had already reached their own limits in all aspects. Under such circumstances, to break through again was simply too difficult. And now, Dao Xuanyi actually broke through? Just like that? At this moment, both of their expressions were extremely unsightly and complicated. At this moment, Lan Shan slightly shook his head. Actually, she's well prepared. Mu Xian fell silent. After Dao Xuanyi reached the supreme level, he left the solitary mystic path and traveled alone. Moreover, he sealed his strength and left for hundreds of years. Now that the opportunity had arrived, it was normal for him to break through directly. Even so, their hearts were slightly sour. From this moment onward, Dao Xuanyi was above the supreme level. In the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, when Yu Xian found out that Dao Xuanyi had broken through, he was extremely excited. Yu Xian laughed madly in the room. Fortunately, he was glad that he didn't choose to help Yi Xian. Otherwise, the Celestial Treasure Pavilion would be gone. He'd made countless decisions in his life, and at this moment, he felt that this decision was the wisest one he'd ever made. Chapter 2175. Above the Supreme Exalt Realm. Dao Xianyi's breakthrough shocked the entire medium world. After all, the strongest expert in the medium world was only at the Supreme Exalt Realm, yet Dao Xianyi had actually attained the Supreme Exalt Realm. Dao Xianyi was a Supreme Exalt now. Yang Nianxue's expression was extremely unsightly. Damn it! Why is Dao Xianyi getting stronger and stronger? Meanwhile, Mu Xian and Lan Shan appeared at the door, and they looked at Dao Xianyi with hesitation. Actually, they wanted to ask how Dao Xianyi had broken through, but they realized that it would be too abrupt. Dao Xianyi wasn't on the same level as them now. Meanwhile, Lan Shan suddenly said, "Supreme Xianyi." When he spoke up to this point, he suddenly laughed bitterly. Dao Xianyi had surpassed the Supreme Exalt Realm, so it wasn't appropriate to address him as Supreme. Dao Xianyi paid no attention to Lan Shan, and he just stared at Yang Nianxue who was in the room. Lan Shan suddenly said, "Supreme Xianyi. With your current strength, are you able to break through the restrictions in this room?" Dao Xianyi shook his head. Lan Shan and Mu Xian's expressions became heavy when they witnessed this scene. Even a Supreme Exalt can't break through this restriction. Exactly how terrifying is the mysterious Pavilion Master? Meanwhile, Yu Xian arrived by their side, and he bowed slightly to Dao Xianyi. "Supreme Xianyi." Dao Xianyi was expressionless. "Is there a way to make her come out?" Yu Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "No." Yang Nianxue's eyes instantly lit up when she heard this. On the other hand, Dao Xianyi and the others frowned. Yu Xian laughed bitterly. The Pavilion Master once said that no one from the Celestial Treasure Pavilion is allowed to enter this room, and we dare not go against the Pavilion Master's words. Meanwhile, Yang Nianxue suddenly smiled and said, "President Yu, that's not right." Yu Xian looked at Yang Nianxue. Yang Nianxue smiled and said, "According to what I know, my little brother is an extraordinary VIP of your Celestial Treasure Pavilion, and according to the rules of your Celestial Treasure Pavilion, all of you should protect him. However, not only did all of you not protect him, you even helped an outsider deal with him. TSK. President Yu, aren't you afraid that your Pavilion Master will get even with you for doing this?" Yu Xian smiled and said, "Miss, according to the Pavilion's rules, we should protect young Master Yi, but we have to act within our means. For young Master Yi to provoke such a powerful opponent, my Immortal Treasure Pavilion is really helpless." Yang Nianxue smiled faintly. "President Yu, my brother has the mysterious heaven token, and I heard that not just anyone can have it. One must have the mysterious heaven token's approval, right?" Yu Xian looked at Yang Nianxue. "Yes." Yang Nianxue blinked and didn't say anything else. Yu Xian spoke solemnly, "Miss, please leave my Celestial Treasure Pavilion." Yang Nianxue smiled and said, "I won't." Yu Xian frowned, "Miss, this is my Celestial Treasure Pavilion's territory." Yang Nianxue shrugged. I'm not leaving. Hearing this, Yu Xian's expression instantly darkened. Miss, do you think that if you don't leave, we won't be able to do anything to you? Yang Nianxue immediately became wary. Yu Xian suddenly said, there are restrictions in this house that will suppress our cultivation. We are suppressed, but aren't you also suppressed? Hearing this, Yang Nianxue's expression darkened. Indeed, her cultivation was suppressed now as well. Yu Xian suddenly said, men. As soon as the voice resounded, 10 men appeared. Yu Xian looked at Yang Nianxue. Everyone's cultivation is suppressed, so it's a competition of numbers. As he spoke, the men behind him were about to enter the house. Meanwhile, Dao Xuanyi shook his head. Yu Xian and the others looked at Dao Xuanyi, and Dao Xuanyi said softly, don't offend this pavilion master. Mu Xian wanted to say something but hesitated. Lan Shan said solemnly, Supreme Xian Yi, the longer we delay, the more changes will happen. Dao Xuanyi fell silent. Actually, she was slightly afraid of this mysterious pavilion master. She had comprehended the Dao because of the pavilion master's space-time technique, and that was why she broke through. Now that she had broken through, she felt that the Dao of space-time was even more profound and unfathomable. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly appeared by Yang Nianxue's side. Seeing Yi Xian, Dao Xuanyi and the others were stunned. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura was different. Yang Nianxue looked at Yi Xian, brother. At this moment, Dao Xuanyi suddenly said, eternal immortality. Saying this, she frowned slightly, half-step supreme. Half-step supreme. Mu Xian and the others were dumbfounded when they heard this. This guy was already a half-step supreme? Yi Xian looked at Dao Xuanyi, let's go somewhere else. After saying this, he disappeared on the spot. Dao Xuanyi and Yi Xian also disappeared. Soon, the two of them arrived at an unknown and mysterious spacetime starfield. The starfield was deep and boundless, and the surroundings were dead silent. Dao Xuanyi looked at Yi Xian, and he was quite shocked. At this moment, Yi Xian did not understand that his body had recovered and reached its limit, the true immortality limit. Not only that, even his divine soul had reached its limit, but his will was slightly weaker. How did he do it? And in such a short time. At this moment, Yang Nianxue appeared by Yi Xian's side, and she said in a low voice, brother, let me tell you some bad news, this woman has broken through. Broken through. Hearing this, Yi Xian turned to look at Yang Nianxue, you're not joking? Yang Nianxue shook her head, no. She just broke through. She is now a superior supreme. Yi Xian was silent. Damn it. This woman actually broke through. But, so what? Isn't this good? This is more interesting. Yi Xian looked at Dao Xuanyi, opened his palm, and in an instant, a sword appeared in his hand. The profound green sword. It was not the real profound green sword, but the profound green sword that he condensed with his heart, but it looked exactly the same as the profound green sword. Dao Xuanyi looked at Yi Xian, without that sword, you are no match for me. Yi Xian said fiercely, I want to try. Boom. As soon as he said this, Yi Xian's body began to burn. Burning the immortality limit body. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura suddenly skyrocketed. However, it was not over yet. After burning his body, Yi Xian's blood began to boil and burn. Burning his bloodline. Rumble. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura skyrocketed again, and the starfield within hundreds of thousands of miles began to boil. However, it was not over yet. After burning his bloodline, Yi Xian began to burn his soul. Boom. At this moment, the starfield within 1,000,000 miles began to burn, and then it began to be destroyed. Mu Xian and Lan Shan's faces became extremely solemn when they saw this. Damn it. This guy is too desperate. Burning his body, soul, and bloodline. He is playing with his life. Yang Nianxue, who was not far from Yi Xian, was also stunned. She did not expect that Yi Xian would do this as soon as he appeared, but on second thought, if Yi Xian did not do this, how could he be Dao Xuanyi's match? After all, before Dao Xuanyi broke through, Yi Xian was beaten up, let alone now that she had broken through. Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and Xiao Ta appeared in it. Xiao Ta said solemnly, "Young lord, let me fight alongside you." Yi Xian smiled, and then placed Xiao Ta in Yang Nianxue's hand. He looked at Yang Nianxue and said softly, "Sister, if I die in battle, do you think Dad will be sad?" Yang Nianxue's body trembled slightly. "Definitely." Yi Xian turned to look at Dao Xuanyi in the distance and smiled, "I have never hated him. Like father, like son. I will not embarrass him." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared. Chi! A flaming sword light tore through the battlefield. At this moment, thousands of galaxies began to be annihilated. This was Yi Xian's most powerful sword move in history. He had really used all his strength in this sword move. This sword move forgot about life and death. He knew that when facing Dao Xuanyi who had broken through, he might only have one chance to attack. If he didn't succeed, then he would die. Seeing Yi Xian's terrifying sword move, Lan Shan and Mu Xian glanced at each other, and their eyes were filled with shock. This sword move was too terrifying. This sword move had surpassed a half-step supremacy stage. No, it was even more terrifying than a supremacy stage. Both of their hearts palpitated slightly because they weren't confident that they could withstand this terrifying sword move. This fellow had improved so much in such a short period of time. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi looked at the terrifying sword move with an expressionless face. Under everyone's gazes, Dao Xuanyi took a step forward, and her right hand slowly clenched tightly. In the next moment, she suddenly blasted a fist forward. Immeasurable. It was an ordinary punch, but it contained boundless energy. The instant this punch was blasted out, the star region within a radius of a few million kilometers was directly reduced to ashes. Doomsday. The expressions of Mu Xian, Lan Shan, and the others instantly changed drastically, and they retreated explosively. This punch and Yi Xian's sword move were two formidable forces that caused them to feel like death itself. If they didn't retreat, then they would really die. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi's punch smashed directly onto Yi Xian's sword. Bang! In an instant, two terrifying forces erupted in front of both of them like volcanoes. In an instant, countless strands of space were obliterated, and both of them retreated explosively at the same time. During this process, Yi Xian's body shattered inch by inch before it was obliterated, whereas, Dao Xuanyi's body trembled violently at this moment, and then it split apart while her soul started to burn. This retreat caused Yi Xian to retreat for over 100 kilometers, and when he stopped, his soul started to turn illusory at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. On the other hand, Dao Xuanyi only had her physical body left. She opened her palm, and then her right hand slowly clenched tightly. In an instant, boundless energy in the world converged towards her, and then her slightly illusory soul started to recover to normal. Moreover, her physical body actually started to be reconstructed bit by bit. Moreover, the aura around her was growing stronger and stronger. Both Mu Xian and Lan Shan were stunned when they witnessed this scene. What's going on? And it's even growing stronger? Meanwhile, Yu Xian spoke in a trembling voice from not too far away, "This is what it means to be eternally." Eternally. The body had transformed into the universe, yet it had surpassed the universe. As long as the universe existed, the body, soul, and will would never be destroyed. The most terrifying part was that every time it was destroyed, one could be reborn, and reborn was rebirth. As long as the universe existed, one would exist forever. Chapter 2176. Immortality. This was true immortality. As long as the universe existed, one would not die. The reason why Yu Xian knew about the immortality realm was because the pavilion master had told him about it. However, he had never expected that Dao Xian Yi had really reached the immortality realm. At this moment, Yu Xian could not contain his excitement. At this moment, he felt lucky that he had changed his mind and did not choose to protect Yi Xian. Otherwise, the celestial treasure pavilion would be gone at any moment. At this moment, he was even more certain that he had made the right decision. Moreover, his intuition told him that if the pavilion master appeared, he would definitely approve of his decision. Offending a super expert at the immortality realm for a person with a small background. How retarded was he? On the other side, Lan Shan and Mu Xian's expressions were extremely grave. At this moment, they knew the gap between them and Dao Xian Yi. It was truly a gap between heaven and earth. Compared to Dao Xian Yi, they were no longer comparable. As if they had thought of something, both of them looked at Yi Xian in the distance. At this moment, Yang Nianxue suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. In the next moment, she brought Yi Xian back to the 9th floor of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion. Seeing this scene, Mu Xian and Lan Shan's expressions became extremely ugly. They had been in a state of shock, so they had ignored Yi Xian and Yang Nianxue. This woman had saved Yi Xian again. At this moment, Dao Xian Yi's body and soul had completely recovered. When she saw Yang Nianxue had saved Yi Xian again, her eyes instantly turned cold. At this moment, the surrounding temperature dropped sharply, and everyone felt as if they had fallen into an ice cellar. After Yang Nianxue brought Yi Xian's weak soul to the 9th floor, she brought Yi Xian directly into the Shao Ta. In the Shao Ta, Yang Nianxue looked at the weak Yi Xian in front of her and said with a trembling voice, "Brother, hold on." At this moment, Yi Xian's soul was almost transparent, but it had not completely disappeared. Because his soul was immortal. However, immortality did not mean that it would not disappear. Moreover, his consciousness was gradually blurring. His body had reached the immortal realm, and his soul had also reached the immortal realm after devouring the green profound sword. However, his will hadn't reached the immortal realm yet. This was also the reason why Dao Xianyi said that he was a half-step to the Supreme Master stage. His willpower was slightly lacking. Seeing that Yi Xian was about to close his eyes, Yang Nianxue suddenly roared, "Are you going to admit defeat just like that? Are you going to admit defeat just like that?" Yi Xian did not respond. He slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, Yang Nianxue suddenly roared, "Are you willing to admit defeat just like that?" Yi Xian said softly, "Sister. I tried my best." Yang Nianxue glared at Yi Xian. "Is trying your best enough? Are you that weak? If you give up just like that, will your father look up to you? Do you think Tianming will look up to you? I will also look down on you. They will all look down on you." Yi Xian said weakly, "I want to rest." Yang Nianxue said angrily, "If you rest now, you will die. You will die. Do you understand?" Yi Xian's soul became weaker and his consciousness became more and more blurry. Yang Nianxue roared madly, "Brother, don't give up like that." Yi Xian's breath was so weak that it could barely be felt. Yang Nianxue was angry and panicked. "Get up, pretty boy, wake up. You." At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at Yang Nianxue and said with a trembling voice, "Big sister. What did you call me?" Yang Nianxue was stunned. Then she said, pretty boy." Yi Xian's throat rolled. Then he said with a trembling voice, "Help me up. I feel like I can still hold on for a while." Yang Nianxue slowly helped Yi Xian up. She looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian clenched his fists. His entire soul was trembling. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. However, his soul was trembling. "Give up. Yi Xian's facial features gradually became twisted and sinister. When was the most difficult time in his life? Of course it was when he was in Qing City. At that time, his mother had passed away. He and his sister only had each other to rely on. In that cruel family, it was even more difficult to survive than now. But at that time, he didn't give up. Why should he give up now? At this moment, he also understood one thing. Faith. At that time, the one who supported him was his sister. At that time, he never thought about dying. If he died, who would take care of his sister? She was still so young. He was her one and only. Not only could he not die, he had to live well. It was because of this faith that he never thought of giving up. And the reason why he wanted to give up was because he had no attachments. His father was invincible. His sister was invincible. Who should he worry about? There was indeed a lot of reluctance in his heart. However, he knew that even if he died, the people he couldn't bear to part with would be fine. If a person didn't have faith, then he wouldn't have the will to fight. At this moment, he wanted to live. Live well. For who? This time, he did it for himself, for Qing Er. Why did he have to become Qing Er's burden? Why? Can't I fight for Qing Er's honor? Was he really going to be a second-generation heir for the rest of his life? He still had so many people he cared about. Why should he die? Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes and bellowed, "No." As soon as he finished speaking, he clenched his fists tightly. In an instant, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly soared from his soul into the sky. In an instant, the entire world within the small pagoda trembled violently, as if there was a great earthquake. It was extremely terrifying. Immortal will. At this moment, Yi Xian finally broke through the shackles of his will and became immortal. Now that his will was immortal, Yi Xian stood up and looked at Yang Nianxue. "Sister, I want to rebuild my body." At this moment, his eyes were filled with determination. Rebuild the immortal body. As long as his body recovered, he would reach the supremacy level because his will and soul had reached the limit of immortality. As long as his body recovered and reached the limit of immortality, he would surpass the immortality level and become a supremacy. Yang Nianxue nodded, "That's easy. I don't have much, but I have a lot of money." As soon as she finished speaking, she took out another storage ring. She hesitated for a moment before she said, "Little brother. This is the last of my possessions. Yi Xian looked at Yang Nianxue. "Call me sister once, always sister." Yang Nianxue curled her lips, then handed the storage ring to Yi Xian. "You can have it. Worst comes to worst, I'll get Little White to plunder more." Yi Xian took the storage ring, then said seriously, "Thank you." These words came from the bottom of his heart. If not for Yang Nianxue, he would really be dead. From the beginning until now, he couldn't even estimate the value of the things he used for cultivation. Cultivation was not something that could be achieved by just relying on talent. It also required money. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Yang Nianxue shook her head. "There's no need to talk about this between brother and sister." At this time, Xiaofan suddenly said, "Young masters, I want to remind you, you are not brother and sister." Yi Xian was stunned. "Xiaofan, what do you mean? Am I really not father's biological son?" Xiaofan said in a deep voice, "I mean, you are not brother and sister, you are King brother and sister. Brother and sister. She is the elder sister, you are the younger brother, not brother and sister, understand?" Yi Xian, Yang Nianxue. In the following time, Yi Xian began to rebuild his body. Yang Nianxue suddenly said, "Brother, I have something that might be helpful to you." Yi Xian looked at Yang Nianxue. Yang Nianxue was silent for a moment, then she suddenly opened her palm. When she opened her palm cracked, and a stream of blood slowly flowed out. Yi Xian was slightly stunned. "Sister, you are..." Yang Nianxue smiled slightly. I also have the crazed demon bloodline, and I have taken all kinds of treasures since I was young. You know, I have been with Xiao Bai and Arya. Not only have I taken many treasures, I have also drunk Arya's blood. However, I really don't want to cultivate my body, so those treasures and Arya's blood are all wasted to me." Saying that, she looked at the blood in her right palm, and then said, "My blood is better than any treasures. Moreover, I also have the crazed demon bloodline, although I haven't awakened it, but after it enters your body, you can make better use of it." Crazed demon bloodline. Although Yang Nianxue also had the crazed demon bloodline, she basically did not risk her life, nor did she go crazy, so the crazed demon bloodline had not awakened. Yi Xian hesitated, and then said, "Sister," Yang Nianxue said softly, "that woman is now above the supreme level, and your body has reached the supreme level, but it is far from enough. Your body must reach the same level as her, only then you can fight her. As for my blood, it will definitely be able to improve your physical body to the next level." Yi Xian still wanted to say something, but Yang Nianxue smiled and said, "Do you know why I came out to train?" Yi Xian looked at Yang Nianxue, and Yang Nianxue smiled slightly. "Mother told me before, she said that I am luckier than you. I have been by her and father's side since I was young, and I have never suffered anything, but you are different, you have been left alone since you were young, and you have suffered all the hardships of the world." Saying that, she shook her head slightly. "I am not convinced, I feel that I can also endure hardships. So, I ran out to train, but the cruelty of reality made me understand that many times, without the help of father and mother, I am afraid I would have died hundreds of times." Saying that, she took a deep breath, and her body relaxed, and then continued, "I have thought it through now. I have suffered hardships, and I have experienced hardships. I feel that I have enough. So, I don't want to work hard anymore. I want to go back and inherit father and mother's family property. With their help, I feel that even if I can't become invincible in the universe, at least it will be easy for me to be able to have few opponents under 3 swords." Hearing that, Yi Xian, who was so touched that he almost shed tears, suddenly froze. "Why does it feel a little strange? Where is my feeling? Why do I suddenly not feel touched?" Yi Xian. Chapter 2177. Second Generation. Yi Xian sighed in his heart. This is a true second generation. Compared to Big Sis, I'm simply trash. Yang Nianxue suddenly said, "What are you standing there for? Quickly absorb my blood." Yi Xian looked at Yang Nianxue, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Thank you, Big Sis." As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and Yang Nianxue's blood floated into his palm. After that, Yi Xian started to absorb Yang Nianxue's blood. As soon as Yang Nianxue's blood entered his body, Yi Xian's blood started to boil like a drop of water falling into a frying pan. Yi Xian was stunned. What's going on? Suddenly, Yi Xian felt strands of terrifying energy suddenly spread out from within his body, and then his body started to absorb the energy madly. Yi Xian was overjoyed when he sensed this. It really is nourishing. Big Sis didn't lie to me. Her blood is even more nourishing than the tree of life. If I absorb all of Big Sis's blood, then I'll probably die on the spot. When he thought up to this point, Yi Xian couldn't help but feel a trace of shame. Big Sis is really good to me. How could I have such shameless thoughts? Calm your mind. Yi Xian stopped letting his thoughts run wild, and he started to absorb Yang Nianxue's blood madly. Gradually, Yi Xian noticed that his body had undergone another qualitative change. It didn't take long for Yi Xian's body to reach the limit of the immortal realm. However, that wasn't the end. His body was still transforming. After reaching the limit of the immortal realm, his body was undergoing another transformation, and it meant that his body would reach another terrifying level. Outside the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, Dao Xuani gazed silently at the 9th floor of the pavilion. Mu Xian, Lan Shan, and Yu Xian's expressions were extremely unsightly. They hid in there again. Those two bastards hid in there again. Can't they have some backbone and fight to the death? Lan Shan suddenly looked at Dao Xuanyi. Supreme Xuanyi, shall we fight our way in? Dao Xianyi shook his head. If you do that, you will be disrespectful to the pavilion master. Lan Shan said in a deep voice, they've barged in time and again. They're already disrespectful to the pavilion master. We don't have to care so much about it. Dao Xuanyi looked at Mist Mountain and said, then you go. Hearing this, Lan Shan's expression froze. Go by myself? Of course he wouldn't go. What a joke. That pavilion master's strength was so terrifying. If he offended her and she held a grudge against him, wouldn't he just die? Dao Xuanyi withdrew his gaze and said, he'll come out again. As soon as she finished speaking, a man slowly floated out from the window of the distant 9th floor. The moment Yi Xian appeared, Dao Xuanyi's eyes narrowed. Supreme. Supremacy. Hearing Dao Xian's words, Lan Shan and Mu Xian's minds went blank. Is he AF** King Supreme Martial Artist? Wasn't he just a half-step Supreme Being? The two of them stared fixedly at Yi Xian. When they saw that Yi Xian had really reached the Supreme Martial Artist realm, their faces turned as ugly as if they had eaten 10 caddies of dung. He really is a Supreme Martial Artist. How did this fellow cultivate? How long has it been? He directly advanced from a half-step Supreme Being to the Supreme Martial Artist realm? Motherfucker. Is the Supreme Martial Artist realm so easy to cultivate? Yi Xian gazed at Dao Xuanyi and said, again. As soon as he finished speaking, his body started to burn, and then his bloodline started to burn as well. After that, his soul started to burn as well. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura skyrocketed. It was countless times stronger than before. Mu Xian's expression was extremely unsightly when he witnessed this scene. Why does he burn his soul and body like it's a game? Lan Shan's expression was extremely gloomy. I want to know as well. Mu Xian stared fixedly at Chen Shi, whose aura was still skyrocketing. Why is he still able to survive after burning his soul and bloodline? Moreover, he's getting stronger and stronger. Isn't this cheating? Is there any justice in this world? Lan Shan remained silent. The tenacity of Yi Xian's vitality had greatly exceeded their expectations. He was like a freak. Dao Xuanyi looked at Yi Xian in the distance. At this moment, she was also slightly shocked. She had not expected that Yi Xian had actually reached the Supreme Martial Artist realm in such a short time. After all, she was also a genius. However, she had spent hundreds of years to advance from the Eternal Immortal realm to the Supreme Martial Artist realm. Moreover, she was considered to be early. Yet now, Yi Xian had reached the Supreme Martial Artist realm in such a short time. This was too abnormal. At this moment, Yi Xian's body, soul, and bloodline had undergone a qualitative change. Therefore, when he chose to burn his soul, bloodline, and body, his aura instantly swept across the heavens like a volcanic eruption. Although he was still a Supreme Martial Artist, his current aura had far surpassed that of a Supreme Martial Artist. Seeing this, Mu Xian and Lan Shan's expressions turned extremely unsightly. Previously, when Yi Xian was a half-step Supreme Martial Artist, his aura was already no weaker than theirs. Now, Yi Xian's aura had far surpassed theirs. This was too heaven-defying. This was too inhumane. This cultivation was like a game to him. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward, and this step was accompanied by a swing of his sword. This time, he didn't just swing a single sword, he swung it 3 times. Slash it over. Slash the present. Slash the future. 3 swords into 1. Moreover, the might of this attack was completely different from before. In the distance, Dao Xuanyi's eyes narrowed slightly, and a solemn expression appeared in the depths of her eyes for the first time. She closed her eyes slowly, and in an instant, the region of space around her had transformed into an enormous vortex. Meanwhile, Dao Xuanyi suddenly clenched her right fist and smashed it forward. As soon as she executed this punch, the space around her instantly became illusory, and then 3 rays of sword light faintly appeared within that illusory space. Dao Xuanyi's gaze was icy cold. Shatter. Bang! This punch caused the 3 rays of light to warp, and it wasn't just the present that was warped, the past and future were warped as well. However, the 3 rays of light didn't shatter. The formidable energy contained within the rays of light ceaselessly destroyed the force of Dao Xuanyi's punch. Moreover, the spatial vortex in the depths of Dao Xuanyi's body gradually started to become illusory. A wisp of a cold glow flashed in Dao Xuanyi's eyes, and then she suddenly spread open her right hand and roared furiously, "Boundless eternity." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly clenched her right hand. Hiss! 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 The spatial vortex where Dao Xuanyi resided suddenly split open, and then the 3 rays of light were torn apart at practically the exact same time, causing an extremely terrifying aura to instantly sweep towards the surroundings. The expressions of Mu Xian, Lan Shan, and the others instantly changed drastically, and they retreated madly. In an instant, the space in an area of a few millions of kilometers was directly obliterated by this terrifying force. At the same time, a terrifying fist tore through the surroundings and smashed forcefully towards Yi Xian. Merely the aura of such formidable force caused Mu Su and Lan Shan to feel terrified. An exalted being? At this moment, a trace of an absurd feeling actually arose in the depths of their hearts when they faced this force. "We're ants." Ants! Both of them exchanged glances, and their eyes were filled with shock. Is this the power of an immortal? In the distance, Yi Xian watched as the fist assaulted him, and then he slowly closed his eyes. Calm down. Focus. In the next moment, Yi Xian suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot forward explosively. Hiss! A sharp tearing sound suddenly resounded through the heavens and the earth. Bang! Everyone watched as the ray of light slashed directly onto the fist. In the next moment, the fist was blasted into pieces. However, the ray of light was instantly obliterated as well. At the same time, Yi Xian retreated madly. A wisp of a ferocious expression flashed through Dao Xuanyi's eyes, and then she suddenly vanished on the spot. At the end of the starry sky, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head while a wisp of a ferocious expression flashed through his eyes. He didn't attack. Meanwhile, Dao Xuanyi's fist suddenly smashed against Yi Xian's chest, and at practically the exact same moment, Yi Xian's sword pierced through Dao Xuanyi's chest. Hiss! Bang! Yi Xian instantly retreated explosively. This retreat covered a distance of over 100 kilometers, and the space in his path was obliterated inch by inch. Dao Xuanyi gazed at the sword in front of Yi Xian. The sword had just entered her body when a powerful force suddenly erupted, and then it ceaselessly destroyed her internal organs. At the same time, her soul started to disperse swiftly. Dao Xuanyi slowly closed her eyes, and then she unfolded her right hand. In an instant, the entire world trembled violently, and then countless strands of mysterious energy surged into her. Her ethereal soul and body gradually started to recover at a visible speed. Moreover, her aura had become even stronger than before. Mu Xian and Lan Shan's expressions were extremely solemn when they witnessed this scene. She was too heaven-defying. Eternal. She grew stronger as she fought. Unless they could kill her with a single strike, otherwise, she really wouldn't die. Moreover, she would grow stronger and stronger. Heaven-defying wasn't enough to describe it. Right at this moment, both of them seemed to have thought of something, and they suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's body had cracked apart completely. Especially his chest, it had sunken down, and it was an extremely shocking sight. However, his body hadn't shattered. His body had actually forcefully resisted Dao Xuani's terrifying punch. Mu Xian and Lan Shan exchanged glances, and a wisp of shock flashed through their eyes. Yi Xian's strength was extremely heaven-defying. He'd actually resisted Dao Xuani's terrifying punch. Mu Xian stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Who exactly is he? Lan Shan fell silent. At this moment, both of them were curious about Yi Xian's identity and background. Such a monstrous genius was absolutely not an ordinary person. He might have a formidable power backing him. Meanwhile, Lan Shan spoke abruptly, "Don't think too much about it. No matter how heaven-defying he is, he'll still be killed by Exalt Xian Yi." Mu Xian nodded lightly. Although Yi Xian was heaven-defying, he was still much weaker than Dao Xuani. Dao Xuani was at the immortal realm. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly spread his arms, and the next moment, he said softly, "Come. Come." As soon as his voice resounded, the surrounding starry sky trembled slightly. Mu Xian and Lan Shan frowned, and a trace of doubt arose in their hearts. What was coming? Right at this moment, both of their pupils suddenly constricted. They saw the starry sky suddenly seethe, and the next moment, countless mysterious forces surged towards Yi Xian like a tidal wave. The power of the myriad worlds in the heavens. The power of the myriad worlds in the heavens. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura suddenly skyrocketed again, and his aura was actually approaching Dao Xuani. In the distance, Dao Xuani looked at Yi Xian. "It's time to end this." Yi Xian laughed loudly, "It's time to end this. Come." As soon as his voice resounded, both of them vanished on the spot. Chapter 2178. Hiss. Bang. The starry sky suddenly started burning. Both of them had utilized their full strength this time. Dao Xian stared fixedly at Yi Xian, who was getting closer and closer, and then she suddenly clenched her right fist and swung it forward. Boundless Nirvana. Bang! With this punch, a terrifying fist light suddenly erupted from her fist. As this fist light appeared, the entire medium world started to tremble. The might of this punch was sufficient to destroy the entire middle world. However, Dao Xian's punch hadn't targeted the middle world. She'd converged her strength onto a single point and targeted Yi Xian. A wisp of a ferocious smile arose on the corners of Yi Xian's mouth when facing this terrifying punch, and then he swiftly drew his sword and slashed. Draw the sword to decide life and death. It was a sword technique that he hadn't utilized for a very long time. At this instant, Yi Xian overlapped madly. One after another dreadful energy erupted in front of Yi Xian like a volcanic eruption. When that punch collided head-on with Yi Xian's countless overlapped rays of sword light. Bang! Suddenly, an explosion resounded throughout the middle world. Countless people were horrified, and they raised their heads to look towards this area while their eyes were filled with astonishment. On the other hand, Mu Xian and Lan Shan had started retreating madly since a long time ago, and they'd moved far away from Yi Xian and Dao Xian. As that terrifying force erupted, Yi Xian and Dao Xian were suddenly blasted flying. At the instant that Yi Xian's figure was blasted flying, his body had started to be obliterated bit by bit. However, the speed at which his body was being obliterated wasn't so fast this time. So, his body was repairing itself at the same time that it was being obliterated. This time, the speed at which he repaired himself was faster than the speed at which his body was obliterated. So, Yi Xian's body was preserved. However, his countenance was pale as a sheet of paper, and his entire body was covered in blood. The strength of this punch had heavily injured him. Dao Xian had stopped moving as well, and her body had started to be obliterated while her soul was swiftly dissipating as well. However, just like Yi Xian, this universe was constantly repairing her body and soul. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly raised her head and looked at Dao Xian. Her lips curled into a ferocious smile, and in the next moment, she disappeared on the spot. Chi! A ray of sword light tore through the battlefield. In the distance, Dao Xuani raised his head and looked at the approaching sword light, his face expressionless. When the sword light arrived in front of her, she suddenly put her palms together, and an invisible barrier appeared in front of her. Boom! Yi Xian's sword struck the barrier, causing it to tremble slightly before cracking open. However, it didn't shatter. In the distance, Yi Xian was just about to attack again. Right at this moment, Dao Xuani suddenly vanished on the spot. Yi Xian swiftly raised his head, and at this moment, an afterimage had arrived in front of him. Yi Xian was expressionless. With a thought, countless flying swords suddenly appeared around him. The two of them once again chose to fight head-on. Boom! Countless rays of sword light were destroyed, and Dao Xuani suddenly grabbed Yi Xian's throat. Right when she was about to exert force, a sword was suddenly pressed against her throat. The two of them who were very close to each other exchanged a glance, and in the next moment, Dao Xuani suddenly exerted force. Crack! Yi Xian's throat directly shattered, and her soul was forced out of her body by Dao Xuani. At practically the exact same moment, Yi Xian's sword stabbed into Dao Xuani's throat, and then she suddenly slashed it. Chi! Dao Xuani's throat was directly torn apart. At this moment, she had no choice but to abandon her body and escape with her soul. At this moment, both of them were in soul form. After they became souls, Yi Xian vanished on the spot once more. Dao Xuani suddenly raised her head, and in the next moment, her soul directly transformed into numerous afterimages that shot out explosively. Bang! Another explosion resounded in the heavens and the earth, and then both souls retreated explosively at the same time. While Yi Xian was retreating, with a thought, numerous flying swords suddenly slashed towards the distant Dao Xuani. In an instant, sword energy crisscrossed the heavens and the earth, and sword light filled the air. In the distance, the corners of Dao Xuani's mouth curled up slightly, and a ferocious expression appeared on her face. She suddenly stretched out her right hand, and then suddenly clenched it. In an instant, the space before her suddenly transformed into a huge black vortex. When Yi Xian's sword light entered this vortex, all of them were distorted, and then they were shattered and obliterated. In the next moment, she suddenly charged forward and suddenly smashed her elbow towards Yi Xian. This smash caused the entire heavens and earth to directly split apart like a spider web, and it was extremely terrifying. In the face of this terrifying elbow, Yi Xian suddenly grinned ferociously. In the next moment, he transformed into a sword and suddenly slashed forward. He fought head-on. At this moment, it was time to see who could survive. Bang! An expanse of sword light suddenly shattered, and then Yi Xian was directly blasted back. Meanwhile, Dao Xuani suddenly pressed forward and smashed his fist towards Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly and mysteriously vanished on the spot, and when he appeared again, he was already over 30 kilometers away. After he stopped, he opened his palm, and a sword suddenly condensed within it. He slowly closed his eyes, and the sword in his hand trembled violently. In the next moment, he suddenly opened his left hand. Sword! As soon as he spoke, the starry sky trembled, and then countless swords suddenly shot through space to arrive above Yi Xian. There were over 1,000,000 swords. At this moment, numerous terrifying sword auras enveloped the entire medium world. In the starry sky, Mu Xian and Lan Shan's expressions had become solemn. At this moment, they suddenly realized that they seemed to have slightly underestimated Yi Xian. This idiot's attainments in the sword Dao are really not bad. In the starry sky, Yi Xian pressed his fingers together and swept them across the sword in his hand. In the next moment, his eyes directly turned blood red, and in an instant, his soul started burning once more. At the same time, his blood started burning as well. Bang! Bang! The moment his blood started burning, the sword in his hand directly turned blood red. Not only that, but the million swords behind him also turned blood red. Below, Mu Xian glared at Yi Xian and said angrily, "Damn it! Why does he burn his soul like it's a game? He burns it when he wants it to, and stops it when he wants it to." Lan Shan stared at Yi Xian, his expression quite unsightly. How many times had Yi Xian burned his soul? He couldn't remember. In any case, this fella burned his soul, body, and blood whenever he fought. Most importantly, this fella still didn't die. This was really F***king ridiculous. In fact, the reason why Yi Xian could do this was because of the profound green sword. After he swallowed the profound green sword, his soul directly reached the limit of immortal realm, and not just any ordinary limit of immortal realm. Because although the sword was gone, the profound green sword's special characteristics were still there, such as its special characteristic of suppressing the soul. Because of this special characteristic, Yi Xian could burn his soul crazily without completely vanishing. It was the profound green sword that gave him the ability to burn his soul and not die. Opposite Yi Xian, Dao Xian was expressionless. She opened her palm, and the infinite God ruler appeared in her hand. At this moment, she no longer looked down on Yi Xian. Nor did she dare to look down on him. Up until now, Yi Xian was getting stronger every second. Although her realm was one level higher than Yi Xian's combat strength was no weaker than hers, although she also felt that it was ridiculous. At this moment, a huge white dragon suddenly appeared on the battlefield. It was the spiritual dragon, the leader of the 36 spiritual veins. The spiritual dragon looked at Yi Xian and Dao Xian in the distance, its face extremely gloomy. "Are you trying to destroy this medium world?" Yi Xian turned to look at the spiritual dragon, his eyes like a sea of blood. "Scram." The spiritual dragon glared at Yi Xian, then scram. After saying that, it turned around and turned into a white light, disappearing into the horizon. Everyone, Yi Xian's face froze. "Damn it! What's going on?" Mu Xian spoke solemnly, "The spiritual dragon is afraid." Mist Mountain fell silent. Afraid? Actually, they were afraid as well. If they had to face Yi Xian alone, then they wouldn't hesitate to turn around and flee as well. The current Yi Xian wasn't someone they could resist. Yi Xian gazed at Dao Xian, and then he didn't waste his breath at all. He just vanished abruptly. Hiss! A ray of blood-red light tore through the battlefield. At the same time, the million swords behind him suddenly tore through the starry sky and slashed towards Dao Xian. At this moment, all the experts in the medium world were horrified. Because Yi Xian's attack had severely threatened the medium world. Dao Xian slowly closed her eyes. She held the ruler vertically between her brows with her right hand, and then she placed the fingers of her left hand on top of the ruler before sliding it down slowly. In the next moment, she suddenly opened her eyes, and then she suddenly swept the infinite God ruler, infinite. An extremely terrifying force suddenly swept out with this swing of the ruler. What was infinite? It was limitless and without end. The infinite God ruler had been created by the ancestor of the solitary mystery path, and it contained boundless energy. The two of them collided head-on once more. Bang! In an instant, countless rays of light were obliterated, and the space around Dao Xian was being destroyed madly. As for Yi Xian himself, he was instantly blasted flying. But a moment later, he forcefully charged towards Dao Xian once more. In the distance, Dao Xian had been completely disregarding the countless rays of light that were tearing through her surroundings. She suddenly stomped her right foot on the ground and vanished on the spot, and then she swept the ruler towards Yi Xian's head. Neither of them retreated. It was a method of mutual destruction. Right at this moment, a Xiao Tu suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian's head, and it forcefully resisted Dao Xian's attack. At practically the exact same moment, Yi Xian's right hand transformed into a sword that stabbed into Dao Xian's soul. Bang! Bang! The Xiao Ta howled miserably, and then it was swept flying for over 100 kilometers. However, it still didn't shatter into pieces because it was supported by Arya's horn. Yi Xian stared fixedly at Dao Xian, and he spoke fiercely, "Woman, it's over." As he spoke, he suddenly exerted force with his right hand and was about to completely shatter Dao Xian's soul. But right at this moment, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly erupted from the infinite God ruler in Dao Xian's hand. Bang! Yi Xian, who was very close to it, was sent flying hundreds of thousands of feet away. And when he stopped, his soul started to become transparent. Everyone gazed at the infinite God ruler, and then a soul slowly floated out from within it. It was a middle-aged man. All of them were stunned. Who is he? The middle-aged man gazed at the slightly weakened Dao Xian and grinned, "Very good. I never expected that a peerless genius like you would actually appear in my solitary mystery path after a few tens of thousands of years." Ha ha ha. Mu Xian suddenly exclaimed, "He's the ancestor of the solitary mystery path, Ji Xian. What the fuck? Could he be an expert above the eternal realm? The eternal realm?" As soon as these words were spoken, Lan Shan and the others were petrified on the spot. Dao Xian gazed at Ji Xian and spoke softly, "Ancestral Master." Ji Xian smiled, "Recuperate first." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and gazed at Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Yang Nianxue had appeared by Yi Xian's side. She held Yi Xian's weak soul in her arms and spoke in a trembling voice, "Little brother." Yi Xian's soul was so weak that it was almost translucent. He grabbed Yang Nianxue's hand and spoke softly, "Big sister, I really can't hold on any longer." Yang Nianxue held Yi Xian tightly and spoke in a trembling voice, "Enough. Enough. You've done enough." Yi Xian grinned, but his smile was pale. He turned around and looked towards the depths of the starry sky, and the image of a plain dress appeared in the depths of his mind. It would be regretful to die just like that. However, life and death were not up to anyone. Yi Xian's eyes slowly closed, and the hand that was holding Yang Nianxue's hand also softened at this moment. "Big sister, tell Dad that I'm sorry. I've disappointed him." As soon as he finished speaking, his breath was as thin as silk, almost non-existent. At this moment, the spacetime not far from Yi Xian suddenly split open, and a woman slowly walked out. The woman was wearing a plain dress. The main body. The woman in the plain dress slowly walked in front of Yi Xian. She bent over and took Yi Xian from Yang Lianshuang's arms. She gently caressed Yi Xian's cheek, and her eyes were filled with tenderness, but gradually, this tenderness turned into coldness. "Clear the area." As soon as she finished speaking, a sword suddenly descended from the starry sky of Middle World. In an instant, the entire Middle World started to burn. Walking Dao sword. Enforcing justice on behalf of heaven? That was in the past. And now? It was enforcing justice on behalf of its brother. Chapter 11, Breaking My Personal Record. Thank you. 592785520 readers have given me 330 monthly votes this month, brothers who have never spoken to me, and brothers who have come to support me, Vast Blue Starry Sky, who have given me 264 monthly votes, and a low-profile brother, Fa Xiaoxian, who has given me 222 monthly votes. There are also many readers who have given me gifts. Please forgive me for not being able to list them all, because there are too many. If I were to list them all, I could write a chapter directly. I have seen every single one of your votes and gifts. Really, I am very touched, because you could have read it for free, and you could have not spent any money, but you still support me. There is nothing I can do to repay you, so I can only write good books, and repay you with more chapters. Thank you to all the readers who have quietly voted and gifted. I know that there are many of them who have voted and gifted me, but they do not say anything. I am really grateful for everyone's support. Finally, those who have money, support me, and those who have no money, support me. Students don't want gifts, and those who are second generation like Yi Xian, please ignore this. Also, yesterday, a brother in the group said that I will not break out more than 5 chapters today, or else, he will do a handstand and have diarrhea. Brother, do you mean what you say? Chapter 2179. As the path sword descended slowly, the entire middle world started to boil. In the next moment, the entire middle world started to burn and gradually became illusory. Everyone was horrified. It was going to annihilate the entire middle world. The expressions of Mu Xian and the others changed drastically at the sight of this, and their eyes were filled with terror. How strong was the aura of this sword? Despair. At this moment, they were in despair. They couldn't even muster the thought of resisting this sword. At this moment, they felt like ants in front of this sword. No, they were even inferior to ants. Ji Xian stared at the woman in the plain dress, and his eyes were solemn for the first time. Your Excellency, a strand of sword light suddenly pierced his throat, and his voice stopped abruptly. Ji Xian's pupils constricted, and his mind went blank as if he'd been struck by lightning. How is this possible? That was the only thought in his mind. He was actually killed in an instant. Although he was just a wisp of clone, he was boundless realm. Even if it was a wisp of clone, in this sort of place, that was a godlike existence too. How could he be killed in an instant? At this moment, his mind was in a daze. Just at this moment, the spiritual dragon that had rolled away appeared once more. She looked at Tianming who was holding Yi Xian in his arms and said with a trembling voice, "Boss. If your sword descends, this middle world will be gone." Tianming glanced at the spiritual dragon with a calm expression. The spiritual dragon's soul trembled from this gaze, and she hurriedly said, "I understand. I understand. I'll scram right away." "Boss, do as you please." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and vanished into the horizon. Damn it! I don't care about the middle world anymore. Staying alive is the way of the king. Tianming looked at Yi Xian who was in his arms. At this moment, Yi Xian's soul had actually recovered completely. Not only that, but his body had recovered as well. Yang Nianxue was dumbfounded. What's going on? Yi Xian opened his eyes. When he saw Tianming, he was slightly stunned, and then he smiled bitterly. "Qing-er. I'm the king of reliance again." Qing-er gently caressed Yi Xian's cheek and softly said, "I don't mind." Yi Xian was speechless. At this time, Yang Nianxue lightly touched Yi Xian's hand and then gestured to the starry sky. Yi Xian looked up at the starry sky. At this moment, the starry sky was already burning. Qing-er wants to destroy the entire middle universe. Yi Xian grabbed Qing-er's hand and said softly, "Forget it. My skills are inferior to others, and I can't beat them. I deserve to be beaten. Don't implicate the other creatures in this universe." Tianming nodded. "Whatever Big Brother says." As soon as she finished speaking, the path sword trembled slightly, and then it transformed into a ray of light that descended by her side. With the disappearance of the path sword, all the experts and living beings in the middle world felt relieved. Just a little bit more and this middle world would have been finished. Yang Nianxue looked at Tianming with a strange expression. Actually, she had basically never seen Tianming before. She had only heard of the legends of Tianming. This was an existence that had hung her father up and beaten up. Wasn't she said to be very cold? At this moment, she felt that Tianming was quite easy to talk to. Tianming suddenly looked at Ji Xian in the distance. The latter stared at her and said mockingly, "Trying to bully me because my true body isn't here? True body? Alive? Hearing this, Mu Xian and Lan Shan instantly felt hope reignite. This Ji Xian is actually still alive. A super expert above the immortal realm. At this time, the path sword beside Tianming suddenly disappeared into Ji Xian's forehead. Ji Xian laughed loudly. What ability do you have to attack this clone of mine? If you have the ability, wait for my true body to descend. As he said this, he seemed to sense something and his pupils suddenly shrank. In the distant endless starry sky, in a certain city, a sword suddenly fell. As this sword fell, the entire floating city became illusory. Within the city, countless powerhouses suddenly looked up, their eyes filled with terror. Who was attacking? Was this going to destroy the seamless city? At this time, an angry roar suddenly resounded from the distant starry sky. How dare you? Who dares to distort spacetime and destroy the seamless city? Do you not want to live? F***CK. Master Tianming, it's you again. Master of Time greets Master Tianming. I kowtow to you. As he spoke, the sound of kowtowing suddenly resounded from the depths of the starry sky. His voice could only be heard by Tianming, but Tianming ignored him. That sword continued to fall straight down. At this time, an angry roar suddenly resounded from the city. Puny swordsman, how laughable. You actually want to use your true body and clone to kill me. How absurd, how laughable. As the voice fell, a middle-aged man charged into the sky. The middle-aged man directly punched the path sword. This middle-aged man was Ji Xian's true body. The moment Ji Xian punched, the path sword directly disappeared into his forehead. There were no fancy tricks. It was an instant kill. It was that simple and direct. An unreasonable instant kill. In the sky, Ji Xian was stunned. He was instantly killed. His true body was actually instantly killed? How was that possible? Was he dreaming? Soon, Ji Xian realized that he was not dreaming because he was disappearing bit by bit, the kind that was about to be erased. At this moment, Ji Xian was shocked and he hurriedly roared, "Woman, do you know who my master is? My master is the left protector of the Time Court, the right-hand man of the Time Master. Do you know who the Time Master is? F***CK. At this moment, a shocked voice suddenly resounded in the starry sky. It was the Time Master. The Time Master suddenly appeared in front of Ji Xian. When Ji Xian saw the Time Master, he was first stunned and then overjoyed. He was about to speak, but the Time Master's legs weakened and he directly knelt down. He said with a trembling voice, "Master Tianming. I swear by the Tao of Time, I don't know this person. My Time Court has nothing to do with this person." At this moment, the Time Master actually cried. He really cried. Scared. He was really shocked to the extreme. Those who had not fought with Tianming would not know how terrifying she was. Once upon a time, he also thought that he was invincible in the world, until one day, he met Tianming. On that day, he was defeated. One sword. He, the great Time Master, could not even take one sword from her. If he had not knelt down quickly, he, the Time Master, would no longer exist in this world. If there really was a god in this world, then Tianming was even more terrifying than a god. At this moment, he did not expect that his people from the Time Court would actually offend Tianming, and the other party even mentioned him. Oh my god! This was a trap for him. Seeing the Time Master actually kneeling there, Ji Xian's mind went blank. In their hearts, the Time Master was a godlike existence. And now, this godlike existence was actually kneeling there, trembling. Oh my god! Who was that woman? At this moment, Ji Xian's face was ashen. At this moment, the walking sword in Ji Xian's body slowly floated out and then pointed at the Time Master. The Time Master was shocked and hurriedly kowtowed. Master Tianming, I and young Master Yi are sworn brothers. I and young Master Yi are sworn brothers. Young Master Yi. The walking sword trembled slightly, and in the next moment, it vanished. Seeing this, the Time Master's body went limp, and he almost collapsed. He felt extremely fortunate. Young Master Yi. Master Tianming really gave young Master Yi face. Fortunately, he had formed a good karma with young Master Yi, otherwise, he would be finished. As if thinking of something, the Time Master suddenly turned to look at Ji Xian, who was about to vanish completely, and roared furiously, F***ck your ancestors. As he spoke, he slapped out with his palm. Bang! Ji Xian was directly wiped out. Ji Xian. In the middle world. In front of Tianming, Ji Xian's clone gradually vanished, and he looked at Tianming with eyes filled with confusion. Who the hell are you? He did not know what had happened to his main body, but he knew that his main body was gone. His clone was like a duckweed without roots. Even if Tianming did not act, he would vanish completely. Tianming did not answer Ji Xian. She turned to look at Mu Xian and Lan Shan, and their expressions changed drastically. Lan Shan stared at Tianming, fight her to the death. Mu Xian nodded, all right. Lan Shan's expression was ferocious, woman, I don't believe you're really that strong. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards Tianming. And he chose to ignite his soul and body as well. If Yi Xian could ignite his soul, so could he. They were all human, so why should he be afraid? Needless to say, Lan Shan did have some ability. After he ignited his soul and body, his aura had reached an extremely terrifying level. Although it was not as strong as Yi Xian and Dao Xian, it was still extremely terrifying. In the distance, Tianming looked at Mu Xian with a calm expression. When Lan Shan was only a few dozen meters away from Tianming, a sword suddenly pierced through his forehead. Bang! Lan Shan's body shook violently, and then it became illusory. Instant kill. He didn't even have the ability to fight back. Moreover, he did not even see Tianming attack. Lan Shan looked at Tianming in the distance, and he was slightly at a loss. Am I that weak? It was so silent that a pin drop could be heard. Am I that weak? That's a supreme exalt. In the shadows, the face of the branch president of the Celestial Treasure Pavilion, Yu Xian, was extremely pale. At this moment, he realized why the pavilion master had given the Dark Heaven token to Yi Xian. It was because he was too narrow-minded. Meanwhile, Lan Shan suddenly turned to look at Mu Xian. Why didn't you attack? Mu Xian spoke with a trembling voice, is there any point? Lan Shan laughed miserably, no. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished completely. He was directly wiped out. Mu Xian gazed at Tianming, and he hesitated for a moment before he said, can I spare your life if I surrender? As soon as he finished speaking, a sword suddenly pierced through the space between his brows and was wiped out. Everyone was speechless. In the depths of the starry sky, the spirit dragon trembled with fear. Fortunately, if**ked off quickly. The world laughs at me for being a coward, and I laugh at their stupidity. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished into the boundless starry sky. In the end, Tianming turned to look at Dao Xian. Dao Xian stared at Tianming with a calm expression, and there wasn't a trace of fear in his eyes. Tianming gazed at Dao Xian, is it someone you called? Dao Xian replied with a question, who are you? Hiss. A sword suddenly pierced through the space between Dao Xian's brows, and then his body stiffened while his soul instantly became illusory. Tianming gazed at Dao Xian, I asked you to answer, not ask. P.S. Wait a moment, I'll be right there. Chapter 2180. Stars flickered in Yang Nianxue's eyes when she heard Tianming. How domineering. That's how women should be. I'll stab my sword through the head of anyone I don't like. Huh. Yang Nianxue started to daydream, and she couldn't help but start laughing as she thought about it. Dao Xuanyi stared at Tianming from afar. You're very strong, but I'm not afraid of you. She wasn't even afraid of death, so she naturally wasn't afraid of anyone. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, Qing, didn't call for help just now. Ji Xian came out on his own. Tianming turned to look at Yi Xian. Do you need me to deal with her for you? Yi Xian smiled. There's no need. Because I defeated her just now. If Ji Xian hadn't appeared at the last moment, then he would have killed Dao Xuanyi. Tianming nodded slightly. She flicked her sleeve, and the walking sword returned to her hand. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, Qing, little soul. Tianming suddenly opened her palm. In an instant, the entire world became illusory, and then a sword appeared in her hand. The green profound sword. Tianming suddenly said, Soul, come. As soon as she finished speaking, the green profound sword trembled slightly. In the next moment, little soul's soul was condensed once more. It wasn't creating a new soul, it was soul return. Dao Xuanyi's eyes were filled with disbelief when he witnessed this scene. Resurrection? Dao Xuanyi couldn't help but ask, how did you do that? Qing, suddenly waved her right hand. Slap. Dao Xuanyi's soul was slapped flying into the starry sky. Yang Nianxue's expression froze when she witnessed this scene. Tianming's temper really isn't very good. The green profound sword in her hand trembled slightly. Tianming gazed at the sword. She pressed her fingers together to hold the sword lightly, and then she swung it down. As soon as she swung it down, two large words appeared on the sword, invincible. Invincible? Yi Xian was stunned. Tianming placed the green profound sword in front of Yi Xian. I have given her a new life. From today onwards, no matter what level you are at, as long as you activate this sword, she will be able to forcefully raise your cultivation by 2 realms without any side effects. That's not all. From now on, this sword contains the power of time. So long as you draw on the power of time, you can destroy all techniques and Daos in the world. Not only that, from now on, no technique can harm this sword, no Daos can suppress it, and no time can destroy it. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. The Qingxian sword was going to be invincible? At this time, Xiao Ta suddenly floated in front of Tianming. Xiao Ta, am willing to go through water and tread on fire for young master. If I don't die, the young master won't die. If you want the young master to die, you must first kill me, Xiao Ta. For the young master, I dare to do anything. Yi Xian was speechless. Yang Nianxue glanced at Xiao Ta. Xiao Ta, you'll be beaten to death. Xiao Ta, Tianming looked at Xiao Ta, not saying a word. Xiao Ta hesitated, then said, Sister Tianming. I don't want to be just a pagoda anymore. Tianming's expression was calm. Then what do you want to do? Xiao Ta immediately said, I want to be an invincible pagoda. Qing, Yi Xian was speechless. Damn, isn't it still a pagoda? I thought you wanted to be a human. Tianming opened her palm, and Xiao Ta fell into her hand. She put her fingers together and lightly touched Xiao Ta's pagoda. Xiao Ta trembled slightly, and in the next moment, his pagoda body actually started to change. Originally, his pagoda body was golden, but now, it was gradually turning dark purple. Tianming looked at Xiao Ta. I used sword qi to shape your body, but you're too weak to withstand the power of my sword qi. So, I controlled the power of the sword qi, and used less than 1/1,000,000th of it. Hearing this, Yang Nianxue, who was at the side, was dumbfounded. Her mouth was so wide that an egg could fit inside. Yi Xian was also a little confused. 1/1,000,000th of it? His mind was blank. Xiao Ta suddenly asked, Sister Tian Ming, how much is 1/1,000,000th of it? Tian Ming was silent. Xiao Ta hesitated for a moment, then said, Sister Tian Ming, how big is the gap between me and you? Tell me honestly, Xiao Ta, can withstand any blow. Tian Ming glanced at Xiao Ta. A little bit. A little bit. Xiao Ta instantly became excited. Sister Tian Ming, you're not lying to me? Tian Ming nodded. Xiao Ta suddenly laughed out loud. Sister Tian Ming, I will work hard. One day, I, Xiao Ta, will surpass you. Tian Ming, Yang Nianxue sighed softly. Xiao Ta's brain is screwed. Yang Nianxue seemed to have thought of something, and she hurriedly walked over to Yi Xian's side. She pulled on Yi Xian's sleeve lightly, and then she said softly, Little brother, you promised big sister a sword. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he said, Qing, can you forge a sword for big sister? If it was anyone else, then he would definitely refuse. But big sister was different. If big sister hadn't risked her life to protect him, then he would have been dead by now. Qing glanced at Yang Nianxue, and then she pondered deeply for a moment before she said, What do you want? Yang Nianxue hurriedly said, Anything. Anything you want. Tian Ming nodded slightly, and then she opened her palm. In an instant, the entire world trembled, and then countless snowflakes surged over from all directions. As the snowflakes entered the world, the temperature of the entire world instantly plummeted. Meanwhile, Tian Ming opened her palm, and a strand of sword energy appeared in front of her. The snowflakes surged into the sword energy, and it didn't take long for a sword of ice and snow to condense into a sword of ice and snow. Tian Ming gazed at Yang Nianxue, use snow as the body of the sword, and my sword energy as the soul. As she spoke, she placed the sword before Yang Nianxue. Yang Nianxue hurriedly took the sword, and then her eyes lit up. The sword felt cold in her hand, but it wasn't cold. She didn't know if it was strong, but it was beautiful. Moreover, it was snow. Her name was Yang Nianxue. She really liked this sword. As if she'd thought of something, Yang Nianxue suddenly asked, Big brother Tian Ming, how much strength did you use in that sword energy? Tian Ming gazed at Yang Nianxue, are you sure you want to know? Yang Nianxue immediately shook her head, I understand. I understand. Saying that, she smiled bitterly, Big brother Tian Ming, is there anything in this world that can withstand the power of your complete sword energy? Tian Ming nodded, there is. Yang Nianxue was a little curious, what is it? Tian Ming looked at Yang Nianxue, that arrogant little girl's body. Arrogant little girl. Yang Nianxue was stunned at first, and then her expression changed drastically, F***ck. Area. Area. Hearing Tian Ming's words, Yi Xian also felt a little embarrassed. Area. If he used Aria's body as the body of the sword, and then used Qing, her sword energy as the soul, thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly felt a little ashamed. Aria was a very loyal friend. I can't think like this. Yang Nianxue glanced at Tian Ming, and began to worry for Aria. Aria was good at everything, but she didn't like to admit defeat. She was stubborn, and even if she couldn't beat her opponent, she would fight first and then talk later. At this time, Tian Ming looked at Yi Xian, I'm leaving. Yi Xian was stunned, and then hurriedly asked, where to? Tian Ming said, the Milky Way. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Qing, can you tell me what you're doing in the Milky Way? Tian Ming was silent. Yi Xian said softly, can't you say? Tian Ming shook his head, of course I can. I'm going to the Milky Way to suppress someone. Yi Xian slightly frowned, someone? Suppress? Tian Ming nodded. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, can you kill that person? Tian Ming looked at Yi Xian, it's a little complicated. Complicated. Yi Xian was silent. Qing also felt complicated, and it seemed this matter wasn't simple. Tianming said softly, "You've changed a lot." In fact, she was a little surprised. She thought Yi Xian would ask her for advice, but Yi Xian didn't. "I've finally matured." Yi Xian smiled. After the previous battle, not only did his strength increase greatly, but his state of mind also underwent earth-shattering changes. If one didn't force themselves, they would never know how good they were. Qing suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian and said softly, "Good luck." After saying that, she hugged Yi Xian and turned to leave. At this time, Yang Nianxue suddenly said, "Boss Tianming, can I ask you something?" Qing looked at Yang Nianxue, not saying a word. Yang Nianxue was a little embarrassed. Yi Xian smiled, "Ask away." Yang Nianxue hurriedly returned to Xiao Ta's room and took out the ancient book written by the mysterious pavilion master. She flipped to the first page and said, "Boss Tianming, what do you think of the pavilion master's theory of the universe?" Qing glanced at the book in silence. Yang Nianxue wanted to ask something else, but Qing suddenly said, "This person's knowledge far surpasses Miss Nian's." Surpasses Miss Nian's. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically when he had heard that. He had to admit that he was shocked. Sister Nian. After all, how terrifying was Sister Nian's wisdom and knowledge. She was practically second only to the three swords. But this mysterious pavilion master's knowledge actually surpasses Sister Nian's? Is he really that heaven-defying? Qing suddenly withdrew her gaze and looked at Yi Xian. "I'm leaving." Then she hugged Yi Xian gently. Then she turned around. She disappeared as soon as she turned around. Yi Xian and Yang Nianxue fell silent. Is this mysterious pavilion master really that terrifying? A trace of worry flashed through Yi Xian's eyes as if he'd thought of something. Qing is suppressing something. All of a sudden, he began to worry. The stronger it is, the more he feels that the universe isn't simple. It really is endless. Are Qing, Dad, and Big Brother really the ceiling of the boundless universe? Yi Xian fell silent. Meanwhile, Yang Nianxue suddenly said, "Brother, I'm leaving as well." Yi Xian looked at Yang Nianxue. "You're leaving as well?" Yang Nianxue nodded. "I've been out for a long time. Mother must be worried." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "Are you going back to inherit the family property?" Yang Nianxue laughed heartily. "Yes." Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he said, "Sister, can you give me some when the time comes?" How lowly. Yang Nianxue smiled mischievously. "Of course. Of course." As soon as she finished speaking, she hugged Yi Xian lightly. "Brother, good luck. I look forward to the day you crush Dad. If you have any difficulties, you can look for me. I can't fight, but I have a lot of money. I'll use my money to smash them to death." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and vanished into the horizon. Yi Xian fell silent, and he suddenly felt a sense of reluctance. Suddenly, the sky in the distance split apart, and then a beautiful woman walked out from within it. She glanced at the surroundings and said, "Where's the president of the Immortal Treasure Pavilion's branch, Yu Xian?" Yu Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly said, "I am." "May I know who you are?" The woman glanced at Yu Xian, and then she withdrew a command token. "According to the orders of the pavilion master, you're no longer the president of this branch. Your actions will be judged by the elders." Yu Xian's face was ashen. "I'm finished." He knows that his future is gone. The woman turned around to look at Yi Xian, and then she bowed slightly. "Respected young Master Yi, this matter was caused by my Immortal Treasure Pavilion." Yi Xian suddenly withdrew the Black Heaven token, and then he tossed it aside like trash. Tui. He tossed the token aside, and then he turned around and left. The woman was speechless. Thank you to all the friends who tipped me yesterday. There were too many to list. Thank you very much. It'll erupt again on the 15th of this month, and it might even be earlier. Watch my writing speed. Thank you to all the readers for your support. Seeking monthly votes. Chapter 2181. The pretty woman sighed as she looked at the black heaven token that Yi Xian had tossed aside. Yu Xian's actions were a devastating blow to the Immortal Treasure Pavilion's reputation. The Black Heaven Token. This was equivalent to someone recognized by the Pavilion Master, but Yu Xian had acted smart and violated the rules set by the Pavilion Master. The pretty woman turned to look at the pale Yu Xian. There's a very, very high chance that you'll be sentenced to death. Even if you're not sentenced to death, you'll be imprisoned in the seamless world forever. Yu Xian, the pretty woman looked at the black-robed middle-aged man. Ah Wu, the Pavilion Master allowed you and Yu Xian to run the Immortal Treasure Pavilion together. Yu Xian didn't respect the Pavilion Master, so why don't you do the same? Ah Wu bowed slightly. Esteemed Ambassador, Wu knows his mistake. The pretty woman shook her head. The elders have decided to take back everything from you, including your cultivation. Do you have any objections? If you do, I won't do it for now. You can appeal. Ah Wu bowed deeply. Esteemed Ambassador, I have no objections. The pretty woman nodded slightly. She spread open her palm and pressed it down lightly. As soon as she did that, Wu's aura instantly dispersed like tidewater. It wasn't long before Ah Wu had become an ordinary person, and his appearance had practically instantly aged after he became an ordinary person. His current lifespan was less than 10 years. Ah Wu's face was pale, and he didn't dare speak. He had no more in this lifetime. Although he was unwilling, he had no complaints because everything he had was given to him by the Immortal Treasure Pavilion. Without the Immortal Treasure Pavilion, he would only be an ordinary person and wouldn't have his current status. The pretty woman glanced at Ah Wu and sighed inwardly. Actually, Ah Wu deserved to die. He didn't respect the Pavilion Master's orders. This was the #1 crime in the Immortal Treasure Pavilion. The Pavilion Master was like a god in the Immortal Treasure Pavilion, and the elders respected the Pavilion Master so much that ordinary people couldn't imagine it. The elders were shocked that something like this had happened here, and a few old fellows who had been in closed-door cultivation for tens of thousands of years had come out. Anger. She'd never seen the elders so angry. A mere branch president dared to disrespect the Pavilion Master's orders. This was unbearable for those old fellows. The pretty woman glanced at Yu Xian and shook her head slightly. Yu Xian, the mastermind, would probably suffer a fate worse than death. Ignoring the two of them, the pretty girl picked up the Xiantian token that Yi Xian had thrown onto the ground and disappeared into the horizon. After the pretty woman disappeared, two men in black appeared and took Yu Xian away. Somewhere in the starry sky, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed. Supremacy. In terms of realm, he was now in the supreme realm. Moreover, he was a supreme who could fight against an eternal realm powerhouse. At this moment, Yi Xian felt a little emotional. Forcing himself. The previous battle with Dao Xian Yi was the first time in so many years that he didn't call for help. I can't beat him. Indeed, in the beginning, he had already despaired several times. He really couldn't beat them. But was he supposed to give up just because he couldn't win? Actually, the scariest thing about humans was not despair, nor was it powerlessness, but giving up. No matter how hopeless the situation was, as long as one didn't give up, there would be hope. But once you gave up, even if it wasn't a hopeless situation, you would still be finished. Seeming to think of something, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Looking back on the past, he was really sloppy and flashy before. He didn't have the heart of a powerhouse at all. It was time for him to grow up. Yi Xian took a deep breath. He opened his palm, and Little Soul appeared in his hand. Little Soul, I won't let anything happen to you in the future. Little Soul said, next time something happens, let Xiao Ta carry it. Yi Xian, Xiao Ta laughed. I'll carry it, I'll carry it. The current me has nothing to fear. Yi Xian, Little Soul, at this time, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and a black box appeared in his hand. This was the box he took out from the Immortal Treasure Pavilion. What was in this box? Yi Xian curiously opened the box. Inside the box, there was a strange weapon. This weapon had a strange shape. It was completely black, and the front half looked like a pipe. It was as long as an adult's arm, but the back half was not a pipe. At this time, Xiao Ta suddenly said, "Holy shit, isn't this a gun?" Yi Xian frowned slightly. A gun? Xiao Ta said in a deep voice, yes. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. A gun doesn't look like this, right? Xiao Ta said, this is a gun from the Milky Way, not here. The Milky Way. Yi Xian looked at the gun in the box and was a little puzzled. Xiao Ta, is this thing powerful? Xiao Ta said in a deep voice, in the Milky Way, it's quite powerful. However, for cultivators of your level, this thing is useless. Of course, this could be left by the Pavilion Master. There should be something different. Yi Xian said, how do you use this thing? Xiao Ta smiled and said, it's very simple. Act cool. Oh, no, load it. Load it and you can use it. Yi Xian looked inside the box. Inside the box, there was a small box. He opened the box. There were 10 sharp objects that were as long as 2 thumbs. Xiao Ta suddenly said, this is a bullet. Yi Xian looked at the bullets. He found that these bullets had strange runes around them. At the top of these bullets, there was a blood-red dot. It was very strange. After Yi Xian pondered for a long time, he finally loaded the bullets. Just as the bullets were inserted into the gun, the entire gun body suddenly shook violently. Then, a voice suddenly sounded from the gun, please replenish your spiritual energy. Spiritual energy? Yi Xian hesitated and said, you can talk. That voice said, please don't talk nonsense. If you want to fire the gun, replenish your spiritual energy. Yi Xian's face immediately darkened. Damn, is it so arrogant? Yi Xian didn't bother with it. He took out a star vein. As soon as he took it out, it was directly absorbed by the gun. The gun said, the spiritual energy is less than 1,000th, and the power is only 1,000th. Do you want to fire? Yi Xian asked, less than 1,000th? That voice said, yes, the more spiritual energy, the more powerful it is. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, if there is enough spiritual energy, how powerful is it? That voice said, it shouldn't be a problem to kill you with one shot. Yi Xian was furious. Can you not be so arrogant? Do you know how strong my body is? That voice said indifferently, don't brag. If you have the guts, try it. Yi Xian immediately said, let's try it. Xiao Ta said with a smile, play with it. Let it know how terrifying your body is, young master. Yi Xian took out 1,000 star veins, and they were absorbed by the spear in an instant. Yi Xian's expression changed subtly when he saw this. At this moment, a white light suddenly erupted from the gun. The white light spread from the end of the gun to the tip. At the same time, that voice said, you can begin. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he took out Xiao Ta and placed Xiao Ta at the muzzle of the gun. Bring it on. Xiao Ta suddenly said, F***CK. Young master, what do you mean? Yi Xian smiled embarrassedly. Xiao Ta, you're tougher than me. You take it. Xiao Ta said in a deep voice, young master, are you afraid? Yi Xian's face darkened. How could that be? Xiao Ta, you were just transformed by Qing's sword energy. Do you have to be afraid of something like that? Xiao Ta said indifferently, I'm not afraid of it, but it's not necessary. I won't take it. You do it yourself. Yi Xian's face darkened. This Xiao Ta isn't easy to fool now. Yi Xian was about to speak when the beautiful woman from before suddenly appeared here. She gazed at Yi Xian and bowed slightly. Young Master Yi. I'm here too. Yi Xian suddenly asked. Miss, what realm are you at? The beautiful woman grinned. Half step to the boundless realm. Half step to the boundless realm. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he heard this. Damn it. She's actually at the half step to the boundless realm. She's even stronger than Dao Xian. She continued. Young master, I'm here to apologize. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he waved the spear in his hand and said, Do you recognize this? The beautiful woman glanced at the spear in her hand, and then she shook her head. I haven't. Yi Xian frowned slightly. You haven't? The beautiful woman glanced at it once more, and then she shook her head. I haven't. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, I obtained it by chance. I wonder how strong it is. Miss, can you allow me to test it? The beautiful woman was slightly stunned, and then she smiled. Young Master Yi wants to test its strength? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The beautiful woman thought for a moment, and then she nodded. All right. Before she came here, she was having quite a headache about how to obtain Yi Xian's understanding. Now that Yi Xian had made such a request, it was exactly what she wanted. Because in that way, it would be equivalent to her helping Yi Xian, and it would definitely be easier to negotiate. Yi Xian grinned when he saw the beautiful woman agree, and then he raised the spear and pointed it at her. Miss, be careful. The beautiful woman smiled and said, Bring it on. Yi Xian was about to pull the trigger when Xiao Ta suddenly said, Young master, you're holding the spear the wrong way around. Yi Xian's expression instantly changed. He hurriedly turned the spear around and aimed it at the beautiful woman in the distance. In the next moment, he directly pulled the trigger. Bang! A ray of white light suddenly surged out, and then the starry sky in an area of a few million kilometers was instantly obliterated. The woman's pupils constricted, and then she suddenly pressed her hands forward. However, her figure was blasted flying in the next moment. She flew out of Yi Xian's field of vision. At the same time, the bullet carried a powerful wave of energy as it swept towards the depths of the starry sky. It was extremely swift, and it vanished into the boundless universe in the blink of an eye. It flew out of the medium world. At this moment, Yi Xian himself had also retreated hundreds of thousands of feet, because the recoil of that spear attack was too dreadful. The most terrifying part was that his entire right hand had exploded apart when he stopped moving, and his entire body had cracked apart like a spider web. Yi Xian was stunned. What's that? Meanwhile, Xiao Ta suddenly said, That thing isn't like any spear I've seen in the past. In the distance, Yi Xian gently stroked the spear in front of him with his slightly trembling left hand, and he said softly, Xiao Ta, I've decided to change my occupation to become a spear cultivator. Xiao Ta was speechless. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.